You rise with the bells long before the pavements are crowded, because in Bath the day begins at the water. You dress quietly and with care, not for show. There is time for display later, but for comfort and propriety, because the morning rite is practical first and social only after the glasses are down. You join the slow current of footsteps flowing toward the Abbey churchyard, where the town's great interior of music and steam waits behind the tall windows. Your path crosses others like threads in a woven cloth, invalids leaning on canes, widows in deep caps, officers on leave, a clergyman who has a physician's note tucked discreetly into a pocketbook, and a shopkeeper who walks more swiftly because he must open his shutters after the second glass. The pump room doors admit you into warmth. You hear the damp hush of mineral breath rising from the springs, a sound like kettles, and the faint, tidy scrape of chairs as people settle along the perimeter. Above you, the ceiling lifts in pale plaster, and the light, when it comes cool and grey through high windows. There is music, because there is always music. A small orchestra set near the gallery, strings first and then a flute that knows the room's acoustics. The notes designed less to be admired than to keep time for a routine that repeats each morning of the season. Even the tuning feels orderly. The players are paid by subscription. Their presence tells you that the spa is not merely a place of cure but a theatre of habit. The queue at the pump itself is modest at this hour. You join it without fuss. The instrument is simple, a marble basin, a proximal spout, and a handle worked by an attendant who knows that the water rises at about 46 degrees Celsius, though your century would call it by a different measure, and that it must be delivered promptly to keep its virtue. You will be handed your portion in a handled glass, warm to the fingers and slightly clouded from the mineral content. You will taste Bath. No one calls it delicious. The flavour is metallic and a little sulphurous, heavy with dissolved earth and the faintest suggestion of stone. It is, however, the taste of prescription. People drink because their doctors tell them to drink, and because doctors, George Cheney with his regimen of restraint, William Oliver with his dry biscuit offered to the bilious, agree that a cure is a collection of small obediences repeated at the same hours daily. You watch the etiquette move forward like a dance. Those with priority, the very ill, the elderly, and the titled who arrive in sedan chairs borne directly to the door, are served without anyone needing to speak it aloud. The rest of you accept the order. You take your first glass, lift it, and drink steadily. To sip would be to extend the unpleasantness. To empty the glass is to perform a virtue watched by others who must do the same, and to signal readiness for the next. Afterward you set the glass on a tray and step aside, because motion is part of the medicine. You are meant to walk between glasses so the water may work, and the pump room provides the long rectangle of floor needed for that gentle exercise. The advice literature has told you as much. You have seen the New Bath Guide, a poem by Christopher Anstey, who, decades earlier, laughed kindly at the spa's rituals even as he described them accurately. You have seen, too, the more prosaic guides that list the hours of bathing, the location of the subscription books, and the proper costume for the baths. A linen shift for women, sleeves to the elbow, for men, drawers and sometimes a waistcoat in earlier years, caps for modesty, servants attentive with towels. But this is the drinking hour, and what matters is the count. 3 small glasses are common, 4 for the stubbornly afflicted, some cut down to 2 if the stomach protests. An apothecary may be seen nearby, advising with the quiet confidence of someone who makes a living from both prudence and necessity. As you circle the room between glasses, you become a moving part of a social mechanism that knits strangers into a temporary city. The master of ceremonies, once it would have been Beau Nash, who reigned in the first half of the century, forbidding swords and bigotry of precedence, enforcing plain rules of civility with the authority of fashion, has scheduled the day so that no one need invent it afresh. The morning waters lead to breakfast, breakfast to calls, calls to promenade, promenade to dinner, dinner to the assembly rooms for cards or dance, the music bracketed by the same polite orchestra that tuned the day in the pump room. You sense the comfort of this structure. It holds the hours as surely as the basin holds the spring. On your second glass you notice the economy of a spa. There are the chairmen who wait outside, their caps pulled down, their chairs ready to carry someone uphill to the Crescent or down toward the Pulteney side of the river. There are the vendors who will later sell Bath Olivers, plain hard biscuits invented by Dr. Oliver as part of his bland diet for patients inclined to excess. And the famous buns whose origins the city debates between tidy kitchens and older ovens, sweet and comforting against the stern taste of the spring. There are milliners who know that a cap purchased at the right hour becomes the talk of a tea table. Booksellers who lay out circulating library catalogues because a novel borrowed in the morning can be discussed in the evening. The water is the pretext, the city is the business. Between your second and third glass you pause along the wall where framed lists once hung. Subscription books are kept nearby so visitors may enter their names and pay their fees, not only for the orchestra but for admission to the baths, assembly rooms and reading rooms. It is an accounting of sociability. To subscribe is to belong, and to belong is to be witnessed walking the correct routes at the correct times. The Abbey's bells give you the hour. A beadle moves tidily through the room. The musicians change a movement. A gentleman whose gout declares itself in the careful angle of his foot accepts his glass with an air of fatalism. A young lady, pale from travel, manages 2 glasses and then sits with a chaperone who watches the colour return to her cheeks. The doctors approve of this small drama of health, supervised not by a hospital but by a town that has made healing practical. Your third glass settles the question of taste. There is no getting used to it entirely, though some boast they do. You drink it because of the spring's old reputation, all the way back to Roman work on the site, forward through medieval faith, and into Georgian theory in which mineral waters are substances like medicines, measurable and affecting. The water rises naturally hot, proof that the earth beneath is active. It smells faintly of its metallic burden, and it seems to give you the peculiar alertness that comes from enduring something mildly unpleasant for a good cause. You set the glass down with a small sense of triumph felt by many at this hour. The orchestra slips into a tune known to everyone who holds a subscription. Conversation lifts like the first birdsong of day. You make your way to the periphery, because part of the right is to see and be seen. You note clothing that speaks the grammar of Bath. Nothing too formal for morning, nothing carelessly rural either. You note faces, Irish visitors whose doctors have sent them to the springs for the winter, a naval half-pay captain with a shoulder set stiffly from service, 2 sisters from the north who will fill their days with library books and walks to the circus, observing details of stonework they will later describe in letters, a widow with the confident gaze of someone who knows the town well. This is, by reputation, a city where rank may be relaxed in exchange for civility. Nash's old rules, no private parties during public balls, no quarrelling, no gaming debts unpaid, echo as customs even when he himself is gone. You can feel the weight of those rules in the way people give the floor to the infirm without ceremony, as if politeness were a piece of furniture everyone uses. The mineral water continues its private work, and you begin to notice the choreography outside the windows. Chairmen cross the square with efficient strides. A porter balances a parcel wrapped in brown paper. A boy hurries with a basket lined with cloth, likely carrying buns warmed for breakfast in a lodging house nearby. The pump room is both a sanctuary and an observation post. You have an hour before the baths open to the general morning crowd, when those who take the waters inwardly will trust the same source outwardly, letting attendants guide them down steps into steam that fogs spectacles and quiets talk. For now, your responsibility is simple: walk, digest, and prepare for breakfast. There is talk, as always, about how many mornings make a course. Some hold to 3 weeks, others to 6, with days of rest inserted like commas to let the body catch its breath. A few will leave earlier, satisfied or discouraged as the case may be. You hear the names of physicians traded like recipes. Cheney, with his warnings against rich sauces and late hours. Oliver, whose biscuit waits like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. Lesser-known men who keep careful notebooks of cases, measuring pulse and appetite against the calendar of the season. You also hear practical advice exchanged in low voices. The best time to secure a good seat in the assembly rooms. The gentlest chairman for a nervous old aunt. The milliner who understands that a cap for Bath must suit both the pump room's morning light and the candlelight of cards. If you wish, you can step out now and cross into the churchyard to look at the Abbey's facade catching the first steady brightness of day. The city lies ready. The bridge with its shops, the crescent high above like a crescent moon of honey-coloured stone. The gravel walk where you may take the air in the afternoon when the wind is low. But you linger, because one more circuit of the floor seems prudent after the third glass. You measure your steps the way others do, not too brisk, regular, hands loosely folded or gloved, chin easy, eyes content to rest on nothing in particular. It is not boredom, It is the cultivated blankness by which the day will ease itself towards sleep later, after cards and conversation have filled their appointed spaces. The orchestra plays a march to close the hour, a signal as practical as any bell. People begin to disperse with the gentle decisiveness of water finding its way downhill. You go with them, because a routine is most effective when not resisted. Outside, you may choose a chair or go afoot. The chairmen will name their price without flourish. They know the streets better than anyone and the tolerances of invalids better than most. If you walk, the pavements are cut with the polite tracks of many mornings, the same stalls, the same angles of sunlight along the same stretches of Bath stone. You pass a pastry cook already arranging his window. The smell of yeast meets the memory of sulphur and makes a new accord you will later associate with this city more than with any single monument. Breakfast is part of the cure as well. There are tables where the biscuits are served plain, to be taken with water or tea according to prescription. There are tables, too, where the buns are sugared and the butter not grudged. You will choose according to your conscience and your doctor. Conversation at breakfast is kinder than at cards. People discuss books, walks, news from London, and the most recent benefit night at the theatre without the intensity of debate. You notice that illness is present but not sovereign. In Bath, the body is treated not as a failure but as a citizen with rights to comfort and attention. The town works because it takes ordinary things, walking, drinking, sitting in company, and gives them the dignity of ritual. As the morning lengthens, you will turn to the baths themselves, or to calls, or to a visit across the river to look at new terraces rising in careful lines. But the foundation of the day has been laid in warm mineral water and the modest pageantry that surrounds it. You have participated in something both ancient and tidy. The Romans built with certainty here. The Georgians arranged with tact. You have drunk what they could not name with modern chemistry but recognised as useful, and you have walked the measured laps that make usefulness feel almost pleasant. Before you leave the pump room precincts, you glance back through the door. Another queue has formed, not so patient as the first, because it includes visitors who overslept or found the taste more challenging than expected, and must negotiate with themselves to try again. The orchestra is packing away, strings in their cases, players tugging on gloves. The attendant at the pump wipes the lip of the spout with economical professionalism. The glass-handled cups shine in a row like small lanterns that will be lit again tomorrow. You know that tomorrow resembles today, that is the point, but you also sense, as you step into the brighter air, that habits shift quietly over years. Mixed bathing has already yielded to stricter notions of modesty. Cards will fall in and out of favour with preachers and magistrates. Masters of ceremonies will come and go, each with a slightly different hand on the pulse of politeness. Even the taste of the water seems to you a tiny bit different with each glass, as if the spring conducts its own negotiations with the deep earth. You wonder, as you join the pavement's flow toward breakfast, whether the true cure in Bath has always been the same, not the water itself, but the human order built around it. The pledge to rise early, to be civil, to walk, to eat plainly, to listen to music and to do it again. And if that is so, you ask yourself, what precisely is it you are curing when you stand in the pump room at dawn? The body, the spirit, or the restless disorder of hours that would otherwise scatter themselves untidily across the day? You leave your breakfast plate as neatly as you found it and step back into the air that always feels faintly washed in Bath, as if the city has been rinsed by its own springs. The second part of the morning belongs not to the glass, but to the plunge. If the pump room taught you measure by mouthfuls and laps, the baths will teach you measure by steps and temperatures. You have your token, your towel, and the plain garments required by the city's idea of modesty. There is no finery, no lace, no silk to be spoiled. The ritual asks for linen and civility. The same music that steadied the drinking hour now lingers in your ear as a kind of metronome for walking downhill. The streets guide you with an almost deliberate gentleness toward the bath's cluster. King's Bath, most famous, most public, sits like a great steaming bowl within its colonnade, a Roman inheritance translated into Georgian routine. To one side lies the cross bath, more intimate, used by those who prefer a quieter circle, or who are told by their physicians to avoid the crowd. The Queen's Bath takes its share as well, especially when visitors overflow in the height of the season. Each pool keeps its own tone, its own temperature and company, as if the waters, though from the same spring, have acquired manners suited to their stones. You choose the entrance appropriate to your sex and station, and hand your token to the attendant, a practised person whose mind holds more timetables, and particulars than any printed guide. He or she will ask how long you intend to stay, not to hurry you, but to place you into the slow clockwork by which the bath regulates itself. Too brief, and the water has no time to penetrate. Too long, and the body grows weak, the head light, the temper irritable. The advice, 15 to 20 minutes, has the sound of wisdom aged by repetition, neither strictly scientific nor merely superstitious. You accept it because others have accepted it for decades, and because your own pulse agrees when you check it without fuss. The dressing room makes modest people of you all. There is a plainness to the garments. For women, a shift of stout linen that clings when wet but preserves a silhouette sufficient to satisfy the rules. For men, drawers and sometimes a waistcoat in earlier years, though fashions shift toward greater simplicity as the century goes on. Caps are worn, and not only for modesty, they keep the hair from the water's mineral tang. Servants assist if you have brought them. If not, attendants will do so with a kind of impersonal briskness which is its own form of respect. You place your clothes into a numbered cubby. The number is a promise. Your garments will be where you left them, folded in nearly the same crease, warmed if you have paid for that small comfort. Nothing in Bath functions better than the small economy of care. You step carefully down the ladder or the shallow steps into warmth that surprises those who have not met such heat in England. The water is not ferocious. It receives rather than overwhelms. Its warmth is the warmth of deep stone, of earth lifted and presented like a practical blessing. Your skin reports the faint sting of minerals, sulfate, carbonate, salts dissolved over distances, while your nose tells you what your tongue already knows. The spring has character. Steam threads the air. The columns rise from it like sentries made of cloud. The surface, faintly ruffled by the motion of bodies, reforms itself after each stir, a patient mirror. At once you're part of a polite constellation. People in caps move along the edges or hover in clusters, conversing in the tone that suits a public drawing room. The pool's circumference serves as a promenade, except you're floating. The rules are few and understood. No violent splashing, no attempts at swimming for sport, no indecent liberties of attention. Chairmen sometimes bring invalids as far as the steps. Attendants support the unsteady with bands under the arms, the old and the gouty being Bath's most cherished clientele. Conversation runs to the safe topics of the day. The last concert, whether the bun baker across the bridge is better than his rival, the weather upon the turnpike road to Marlborough, because seriousness is reserved for physicians and for letters written home after supper. You are advised, if your case is delicate, to keep to the shallows and to hold the handrail now and then, for the head may swim before the limbs do. You test this and discover the counsel is sound. The body loosens as if a knot had been soaked and teased apart. A woman near you, pale as a hyacinth bulb kept in a drawer, smiles for the first time that morning. A gentleman whose complaint shows itself in tightness at the chest breathes as if the muscles around his ribs had remembered their proper length. A boy barely out of school, brought by an anxious aunt for some vague constitutional failing, forgets to look self-conscious and lets the water carry him 3 paces farther than he meant. You witness these modest improvements without commentary, because Bath has taught you that health is a public art conducted in private tones. The attendants keep time subtly. A glance measured against a clock. Some rooms show 1, others trust a habit suffices. A bell may sound softly to remind bathers that the hour turns. Those who must take a second immersion, temperatures vary slightly between the baths. Your doctor may send you from Cross to King's or the reverse. Do so as if changing salons. Behind the scene, someone balances supply with custom. Which spring feeds which cistern first? How much to let off? When to skim the surface to remove stray leaves carried in on caps or shoulders? You may never see this work, but you feel its competence in the steadiness of the water against your skin. There are, of course, rules of rank, but they are softened by the city's famous manners. Beau Nash, earlier in the century, had the talent of converting precedents into choreography. First those least steady on their feet, then those who must keep to a schedule for medical reasons, then the rest in the order chance delivered them to the door. His successors preserve this spirit. The baths are not the theatre, and yet there is staging, not the church, and yet there is ritual, not a hospital, and yet there is treatment enough to justify prescriptions and fees. You find that the mingling of classes here, so often remarked upon by visitors, produces fewer shocks than elsewhere because everyone is stripped to the same plain uniform of health. When the prescribed minutes have passed, you climb out with care, noticing that the air that once felt mild now feels cool against warm skin. Towels, rough enough to bring blood to the surface, are pressed into service. Caps are removed. The red line the water has drawn across your arms fades as the minutes pass. In the dressing room there is a level murmur as bodies reassume their identities. Cuffs fastened, stays laced, boots tugged on, watch strings reattached to waistcoats. But even in these reclothings, the city's modest democracy persists. You may see a dowager solicit a servant's opinion about the draft at the north door. You may watch a colonel hold the strap for a stranger's bath chair, while an attendant fetches an extra towel. Politeness is a civic infrastructure here, as necessary as the conduit that carries water under the street. You exit by a different door than you entered, partly to keep the flow sensible, partly to break your morning into chapters. A bookstall is close by, and you pause, as nearly everyone does, to scan a printed bill. This evening's theatre programme, tomorrow's concert of music for strings with a bravura for flute. A notice from the Master of Ceremonies reminding subscribers of the hour for the country dances and of the prohibition against private routes during public balls. There is a list of names in the latest circulating library catalogue, new novels and travelogues and sermons, so long that you suspect the librarian's true art is to make everyone wait just long enough to value the book they eventually carry home. You continue your constitutional on the gravel walk, the long level path shaded by trees, famous for being both secluded and public at once. Here your doctor has told you to spend half an hour after bathing, not to rush the return to ordinary temperature. You obey, because obedience, you now understand, is the city's cure in miniature, repeated moderate acts with a timepiece in the background. You notice how the path is used as a social dial. Those who walk briskly are signalling confidence. Those who stroll with careful, measured steps are showing adherence to a rule. Those who pause frequently to survey the view toward the meadows are discovering that healing sometimes looks like idleness properly named. After your circuit, you cross the river by Pulteney Bridge, where shops sit as if they had been persuaded to balance above the water for the sake of commerce. Milliners display caps whose edges will catch candlelight at cards. Haberdashers have tapes and laces and practical pins. A seller of gloves arranges them with military precision by size. You note the prices, as everyone does, for Bath's prosperity has always depended on travellers who do sums as readily as they do steps. Even this counting belongs to the day's regimen. How much for a fortnight's lodging, how much to retain a chair by the month, which pastry cook gives honest measure in buns, what a subscription to the rooms includes and does not include. The town is a ledger with pleasant handwriting. By noon the public rooms begin to stir toward their other life. The assembly rooms will later hold cards, conversation and dancing under their chandeliers, for now they house preparations, the checking of candles, the laying out of fresh waxed floor for the country sets, the unrolling of green baize on card tables, the polishing of sconces that will double every flame. You step through one of the saloons in daylight. There is a quiet dignity to empty space that will hold so much talk. You can almost measure the volume of voices to come by the way the parquet carries your shoe's small sound. You do not linger, because lingering is an evening verb here. Instead, you mark the hour with a glance and fold the future neatly back into the pocket of your day. The physician's quarter near the baths receives you next, not as a patient at the door, your regimen is straightforward, but as a browser in a window filled with glass jars and apothecary scales. There are printed treatises in the bookseller's adjacent window that explain why the waters help, theories of the nerves, of sweat and pause, of digestion corrected by warmth and movement and plain food. Dr. Cheney's warnings about gluttony and late nights, Dr. Oliver's biscuit praised for its honesty to the stomach, various pamphlets disputing whether the waters ought to be taken fasting or with toast. All the earnest paperwork of health is here, as reassuring as the steady drip you sometimes hear under gratings where the spring sends its emissaries into the street. You see, too, the small economies that support the infirm. Bath chairs, wheeled seats with hoods against wind, move at a pace gentler than a coach, and more dignified than an arm. If your strength is variable, the chairmen know it before you admit it. They have routes by heart that avoid the sharpest gradients and settle gently at the thresholds of houses used to such arrivals. Fares have been posted for years, and disputes are rare, for reputation is currency in a town where visitors write letters home. A good chairman's name is kept in as many pocketbooks as a good apothecary's. The day lengthens toward dinner, The main meal in the old style, though London habits press later hours here as they do everywhere. You notice how Bath, for all its novelty to visitors, still keeps older patterns. Early rising, measured exercise, daylight errands, civic amusements that begin at an hour kind to candles. The town cooperates with sleep, not because it is dull, but because it is efficient. Even the bustle has tidy edges. You can imagine how a traveller unused to such order would at first resist and then succumb to its convenience, like someone finding a chair that fits the back despite prejudice against its plainness. Afternoon brings small weather changes that matter to those who must walk daily. A wind off the river encourages cloaks. Sunlight on the hill makes the crescent glow with its honeyed stone. A spatter of rain brings sedan chairs out from their ranks, their leather curtains shiny with droplets that drum a soft music as the bearers advance. You observe this small choreography with the detached interest the city itself encourages. In Bath, to be a spectator is to participate. 1,000 small acts of noticing keep the place regular. You pause again at the pump room in late afternoon, not to drink, for the appointed hours have passed, but to look in at the subscription books. Names have been added in a neat hand, a record of arrivals that is almost a social diary. You recognise some from breakfast, others will become familiar by the second week. The orchestra is absent. In its place, the echo holds court, a reminder that even silence in this room is designed. A beadle adjusts a chair without being asked. You leave with the faintest impression that the day's shape is not accidental but authored. The theatre's playbill posted on the Abbey wall tempts you to an evening plan, a benefit night for a comedian, a farce after the main piece, prices listed for pit, boxes and gallery, and a script so clear you feel invited to budgeting. You could go, many will, or you could choose cards at the rooms, where Pharaoh and whist will keep tempers nimble, and the master of ceremonies rules will keep the room fair. Or you could simply walk again, and watch lamps appear one by one along the streets, the city lighting itself like a careful reader placing candles behind each page of a long book. But whether you turn toward boards, bays, or paving stones, you recognise that everything since dawn has been one continuous remedy administered by a town to its guests, rising early, dosing precisely, moving moderately, bathing briefly, eating plainly, walking again, talking without venom, sitting without sloth, retiring before the hour bruises the eye. You find that the waters, hot, mineral, ancient, are both the cause and the excuse for this whole apparatus of sense. A person seeking marvels might be disappointed. A person seeking rest, order, and a plausible improvement will find them delivered in small, regular parcels. As evening climbs its own ladder, you return to your lodging along a street where windows glow with the same pale gold the city's stone lends to light. You set your gloves on a table, your hat on its peg, and your day in its box. Tomorrow will ask the same of you and give the same in return. You feel the pleasant fatigue that comes not from excitement, but from the frictionless passage of hours designed in advance for your temper and ailments. In the quiet, you think of the Roman work underfoot, of monks who once kept their own rhythms here, of 18th century stewards who turned those rhythms into subscription and schedule. You wonder, not unhappily, whether the future will bring a different theory of medicine that either confirms or contradicts the old wisdom, and whether, even then, people will still come to Bath seeking what the spring seems to promise. If routine is the town's real prescription, you ask yourself as you unpin your sleeve, what happens to the cure when a visitor, by choice or mischance, breaks the pattern, skips the drinking hour, lingers too long in the pool, sleeps past the bell, or replaces the evening walk with a second plate at dinner? Evening in Bath unfolds as the natural counterweight to dawn. The same city, the same stone, the same measured temper, but turned gently toward lamplight and company. Where the morning made health a private discipline supervised in public, the evening turns sociability into a kind of medicine of its own. You keep the schedule because the schedule has already kept you, and by the time the first lamps glow behind the assembly room's tall windows, you find that the day's mineral taste has thinned into a steadier appetite, for plain dinner, for calm conversation, for the ordinary relief of belonging to an order larger than your own concerns. You dine at an hour that would look old-fashioned in London but feels practical here. Meat not overladen with sauces, vegetables boiled more than a modern palate would praise, a pudding that sits squarely and offends no prescription. If your doctor has written down rules, you observe them. If he has only spoken them, you remember. The water you drank at dawn becomes, in effect, a promise you keep at table. Those who boast of exceptions, an extra glass of wine, a rich ragout, a second helping of pies, tend to speak more loudly than their comfort later warrants. Bath encourages a temperate appetite not because it is austere, but because it is a town built on continuities. You will eat again tomorrow. You will not improve the spring by defying it. After dinner, the town opens like a book to its well-thumbed page. You may turn toward the assembly rooms for cards and dancing. The chandeliers, a shimmer by day, take command by night. Wax is expended without parsimony, but with order. Sconces are spaced to flatter rather than dazzle. Floors are waxed to a precise compromise between glide and grip. The Master of Ceremonies, or the current holder of a role first perfected by Beau Nash, presides not as a tyrant but as a conductor of politeness. He pairs partners, introduces strangers, smooths small frictions with the assurance of someone paid to remember names you have already forgotten. The famous rules, no swords, no quarrels, no private routs during public balls, no late arrivals that upset the set, have softened since Nash's day into habits, which is to say they no longer require enforcement. They enforce themselves. Cards occupy one saloon, dancing another. The tea room provides its own temperate interval. Whist favours those with memory and calm. Faro rewards discipline as much as luck. Loo is tolerated but watched. You notice the economy under the courtesy. Subscriptions paid for this light, these musicians, the green bays, the attendance of servants. Nothing in Bath is precisely free, yet the town has a way of converting money into manners so successfully that the fee vanishes into the courtesy it buys. You take a hand, win a small rubber, lose another, and are reminded that the point is neither victory nor loss, but the evenness with which both are received. Excess of feeling injures digestion. Moderation, like the water, does its work without speech. If you do not care for cards or are forbidden late hours, you may walk to Sydney Gardens for the illuminations. Their pathways are threaded with lamps. Small orchestras spill light music that neither demands nor resents attention. Fireworks climb and fold themselves back into the dark with the same tidiness Bath applies to daylight errands. Pleasure grounds turned by design into public health. Exercise for the infirm framed as an entertainment for the sound. Children drowse in chairs. Aunt and niece review the hats seen earlier on Pulteney Bridge. A visiting officer keeps half an eye on a schedule that will soon call him back to barracks elsewhere. The city's strength is neither austerity nor excess. It is the patient conversion of both into routine. From time to time, the theatre competes successfully with every other claim. Benefit nights in particular swell the boxes. Prologues are delivered with care, and the farce that follows the main piece, doubted by some physicians as a stimulant too lively for the nerves, gets its laugh and does no lasting harm. You consult your pocketbook and find that you can afford 2 nights a week without cutting into your subscriptions. A visiting actor, praised last season in Bristol, proves adequate. A singer, advertised handsomely, is better than her bill. The pit instructs itself in manners by watching the boxes. The gallery punishes dull scenes with honest noise. Even here the town's broad rule holds. The drama is strongest when no part of it disturbs the order of the week. Behind the agreeable surface is the machinery that made it possible, and, in making it possible, made it curative. Bath employs chairmen who learn their regulars' tempers, musicians who tune to a room's appetite for sound, attendants who measure immersion by complexion rather than by clock, cooks who know what it is to season without inflaming, milliners who design for morning light and candlelight both, beadles who carry authority like a broom, lightly, but to keep the floor swept. You start to see the city itself as a large instrument tuned daily by people whose names do not enter guidebooks. The cure lies in the hands as much as in the spring. And there is, of course, the matter of departures, for no regimen lasts forever. Visitors arrive on postchaises drawn down the turnpike's gradient by expectation, and depart up the same road pulled by duty, economy, or the conviction that their course is complete. You watch this traffic with a mild ache that is not sentiment so much as recognition. A season is made, in part, by its endings. Landladies inspect rooms with a briskness that spares embarrassment. Chairmen shake hands with gratitude sheathed in brevity. Physicians accept a letter left with the fee, promising to answer inquiries post when the patient is home again. The circulating library sends reminders to return books. The assembly rooms record a name struck through in the subscription ledger, next to the neat date of leaving. The city does not cling, it continues. Some write of Bath afterward as if they had attended a polite sermon on health and manners. They report fewer palpitations, steadier sleep, small pains softened, digestion improved, tempers made even, spirits strengthened by conversation, untainted by scandal. A few declare themselves cured, others improved enough to be grateful without testing providence by boasting. A smaller number admit nothing altered, and yet confess they would return because the order of days here gave them back something they had allowed to fray. The sense that the body is manageable if the hours are managed, that society is bearable if rules are observed by all, that illness is less humiliating when it is incorporated into public routine rather than hidden. The exceptions, the days that go wrong, are themselves instructive. You asked in your lodging last night, what becomes of the cure when someone breaks the pattern, skips the drinking hour, lingers too long in the bath, sleeps past the bell, replaces the evening walk with a second plate? The answer is the answer of any well-run household. One day's disorder multiplies itself unless checked by the next day's obedience. The spring does not punish, it merely fails to compensate for what you ask it to forgive. The town, in turn, offers no scolding, only the steady opportunity to return to the habit that was working before you challenged it. There are gentler misalignments as well. A mother brings a son too young to value routine and finds, after a week of protests and quiet weeping, that the water has made him not docile but thoughtful. She returns home with a child whose memories are of music at breakfast and steam rising from stone. An elderly clergyman indulges in whist with more zeal than prudence, and is rescued not by medical intervention, but by the master of ceremonies, suggesting a seat nearer the door and a partner known for slow play. A widow who came to be mended returns not repaired but re-equipped, having learned that sociability, properly measured, is a brace as effective as any bandage. None of this is dramatic. All of it is useful. If you stay long enough, you start to read the city's architecture as an index of its thinking about bodies and time. The circus, nearly round, gives you a walk that returns you to yourself without asking you to decide where to turn. The crescent, serene and facing open ground, offers a horizon large enough to stretch the eye without tiring it. Pulteney Bridge, with shops on either side, converts a crossing into an errand, a necessity into a convenience. Even the pump room, oblong and paced by music, builds exercise into waiting. This is not accidental beauty. It is utility, considered, repeated, and refined until it looks inevitable. You take to writing your own small notes in the manner of those who came before you. Not a diary of confidences, but a ledger of practices, glasses taken, steps walked, temperatures tolerated, hours slept, meals kept plain. When later you reread these lines, they will look like a dull arithmetic. Yet as you keep them, you discover that the numbers behave like words of a soft prayer recited in a language you almost forgot. The language of patience. You begin to understand why physicians of the century filled notebooks with cases as if they were parsonage account books. Not to turn bodies into sums, but to keep bodies from becoming riddles. There are, too, the correspondences Bath makes possible. The circulating library sends novels up to lodgings that would never have thought to invest in them. Letters are posted home from the same counter, where you return a volume of sermons. A violinist who played morning tunes in the pump room turns up in the theatre orchestra at night. A chairman who bore you to Cross Bath on a rainy morning is the same who guides your visiting cousin through the crowd outside the rooms. A pastry cook who sold you a Sally Lunn at breakfast nods when you pass before Vespers at the Abbey. A town feels honest when the same faces appear in different contexts without dissonance. Eventually the day comes when you, too, leave. Your lodging is set to rights, your name is crossed out in the subscription book. The chairmen carry your trunk, the landlady wishes you well with sincere economy. The physician shakes your hand in a doorway that has seen every kind of optimism. The post-chaise waits. You take a last look down the street, a view you will be able to summon later without effort, and you find yourself rehearsing, almost involuntarily, the rules you learned without learning. Rise early, drink what is prescribed, walk between glasses, bathe temperately, eat plainly, move regularly, speak civilly, retire before your thoughts turn jagged. You do not promise to keep them all, but you remember that they kept you. On the road home, the spring recedes mile by mile, but it does not vanish. It has converted itself into a temper you can carry. You will revert, of course, to local habits. Church at your usual hour. dinners bearing the signature of your cook rather than your doctor, social calls paced by the distances of your parish rather than by the length of the gravel walk. But the city will have left you with small changes that accumulate quietly. You will notice when a room is adequately aired. You will measure out irritation as if it were a glass too many. You will take walks that go out and return by a different street not to avoid neighbours, but to take the air as if it were part of your duty. Years later, when theories of nerves have changed names and mineral analysis has acquired stricter decimals, you may read that the waters were less powerful than claimed. It will not trouble you. You will have learned that a cure is often the name given to a compact between habit and hope. If the water's chemistry did less than its reputation promised, the town's design did more than you expected. The orchestra's morning scales, the Beadle's quiet order, the chairman's steady pace, the measuring of minutes in warm stone, the modesty of linen shifts, the discipline of walking between glasses, the civility that forbade quarrels where health was the point. These constituted a regimen as real as any prescription, and far more agreeable than most. If there is a lesson to carry forward, it is not a romantic one. Bath does not trade in miracles. It sells subscriptions to well-timed decencies, and lets the human animal recover under cover of custom. Its genius lay in treating ordinary acts, drinking, bathing, walking, listening, dining, speaking, as instruments in a score that had to be played every day, with variations light enough to keep it human and rules firm enough to keep it useful. In another century, other towns will discover other springs and invent other architectures of health. Physicians will revise their explanations, spa music will change its harmonies. But the thing that mattered in Bath's best years is an older understanding and as practical as ever. That the body prefers a clock to an argument, that society thrives when its amusements are disciplined, and that order, when arranged with kindness, is a form of care. You returned to your room after your final evening at the Rooms and looked once more at the small glass-handled cups stacked by the pump, at the musicians closing their cases, at the chairman's leather hoods drying against a wall. Nothing in that sight promised salvation. Everything in it promised steadiness. You slept well. In the morning you left, and the town absorbed your going with the same composure with which it had received you. So when you're asked what Bath gave you, what the ritual of dawn in the pump room amounted to, you might answer in a sentence that would suit the city's modesty. It taught you to live by a schedule you could respect. The warm mineral taste, the measured steps, the polite music, the cards played without triumph or despair, the buns taken with or without butter according to conscience. These were not episodes. They were a pattern. And if that pattern outlived the prescription that justified it, perhaps that is the truest proof of a cure. In the end, then, what is worth preserving from Bath is not the water alone, but the arrangement that dignified small acts. When modern life offers you stimulants harsher than Pharaoh, hours later than assemblies, entertainments sharper than fireworks, you can still reclaim the old measure: early rising, temperance, fresh air, sociable order. If health is never final, neither is disorder. You may always return to a schedule, if not to the spring itself, that makes your days proceed as Bath taught them to do, modestly, regularly, kindly. He posts rules, adjusts assemblies, music cues, ribbons, cards, scandal cooled, city choreographed by one man's nods. Bath breathes evenly between minuets. You hear his name before you meet the idea of him. In Bath, the water moves the body, but the story that moves the town is Richard Beau Nash, master of ceremonies for more than half a century, the man who turned mixed visitors and muddled hours into a schedule that could be kept. To understand why a single figure mattered in a city devoted to cures and entertainments, you begin at the practical level. Without rules, polite amusement collapses into private advantage. Without a timetable, sociability degenerates into nuisance. Nash supplied both, and he did so with a method that disguised command as convenience. He arrived in Bath in the early 18th century with more social nerve than money, more instinct for order than learning, and a gambler's understanding that the house prospers when play is regulated. The town he found was useful but untrimmed. People came for the springs, they bathed, they drank, they walked, they played cards, they danced. They also quarrelled, cut one another in public, brought swords into rooms designed for bows, insisted on precedence at doors and in sets, and allowed late arrivals to dislocate the evening. Nash perceived that the spa's prosperity would depend not simply on the water, but on the agreeable predictability of its hours. He set about composing those hours into a civil score. The title he made his own, Master of Ceremonies, sounds ornamental, but its duties were domestic in the old sense of housekeeping. He posted rules and then stood where people could see him observing them. No swords in the rooms, no boots at balls, no private routs on nights when the public assemblies were open to all subscribers, no titles claimed at the door to thrust someone out of their rightful place in a country dance set, no entrance into the room after the minuets were begun that would interrupt the circle, cards allowed, but debts to be discharged, fortunes not to be ruined in the town that prided itself on health. These are small matters one by one. Together they made it possible for strangers to meet without calculation exhausting the evening. You locate his influence in details. The posted subscription book with names entered in the same hand, avoiding disputes about who had paid. The bow he offered to new arrivals as he made introductions, saving the awkwardness that otherwise repels the unconnected. The dance card set at hours that suited the rest of the day's regimen, never so late that candles became a hazard for nerves, never so early that physicians could complain the waters lacked time to work. You picture him, plainly dressed but exact, a certain formality in his bearing, standing at the door to the assembly, ready to pair a shy daughter of a country clergyman with a partner who would make her steps look competent, and to remind a viscount that the first set today was not his by right but by turn. In an age that talked much about politeness, he made the term measurable. Politeness in Bath meant the distances between chairs, the width of the promenade around the card tables, the length of a country dance before the orchestra paused for tea, the number of musicians sufficient for a room of a given size, the fee that kept the doors equally open to many and impassable to those who would not observe the forms. He did not invent the assemblies, these had predecessors, but he gave them a spine. He turned a tendency into a habit and a habit into an expectation. The town rewarded him because order brought income. When visitors knew what they would meet upon arrival, how to subscribe, where to sit, when to dance, which nights to expect cards, they planned longer stays. Landladies could count their weeks, chairmen could count their fares, pastry cooks and milliners could stock accordingly, musicians could be engaged by the month. Nash's laws were not laws of morality, they were laws of traffic for a city of conversation. The most ambitious of them was his insistence that strict precedents yield to a tempered equality. A duchess might lead the first minuet on her first night, but by the second she would take her station like anyone else. The shock of that rule softened quickly into relief. Without it, the room belonged to the few. With it, the room belonged to the subscription. You trace too the way he handled gaming, because cards were the nervous system of Georgian sociability. He preferred regulation to prohibition. Faro and whist were permitted, but tables were supervised, stakes kept within bounds, and temper kept cooler by green bays and steady light. He understood that luck felt less dangerous when the clock ran the evening rather than the appetite of a reckless player. He was no preacher, yet his posted cautions against high play saved reputations as surely as a physician's cautions against heavy suppers saved sleep. Bath in his hands became a timetable as legible as a prayer book. Morning waters, walking between glasses, breakfast with music, bathing in the appointed pools, the promenade, dinner at a reasonable hour, the assembly, cards or dance, dispersal before midnight. The genius was not in novelty but in repetition. A visitor could insert themselves into the pattern and feel within days at home. That sense of home was Nash's most lucrative product. It sold itself quietly to the shy and the infirm, who discovered that the Master of Ceremonies bow offered to all alike was a passport through an evening they had feared would expose them. If you want the material sign of his method, you look at the rooms themselves. The early assembly spaces, modest by later standards, were organised around his principles. Entrances wide enough to prevent stoppages, galleries for the musicians where their sound would carry but not dominate, floors prepared to take country dances without snatching shoes, card rooms adjacent rather than remote so that people could pass between amusements without tearing the fabric of company. Later, when grander rooms were built in Bath, they inherited the geometry of his thinking, even if the plasterwork outshone his plain gentility. Architecture became etiquette carved in stone and wood. You place Nash in the chain of daily errands, and you see how thoroughly his rules were woven into the city's commerce. Because assemblies were public and regular, private parties learned to schedule around them. Because quarrels were suppressed at the rooms, affronts were carried, if they must be carried at all, outside into spaces designed for exercise rather than display, and often dissolved along the gravel walk. Because chasing precedence at the door gained no advantage, those who might have exploited their rank settled into the relief of being merely sociable, which in turn made the ordinary feel welcome enough to subscribe again. The town's tone steadied, and the steady tone made a wider market. He did not act alone, and he knew it. The musicians, hired by subscription, kept time as surely as any clock. The beadles enforced quiet without turning the rooms into a parish vestry. The chairman delivered the ungainly and the grand to the same doors with the same brief nods. Landladies disciplined noise at stairwells. Apothecaries discouraged excess with a raised eyebrow, quoted after supper as if it were law. Nash's gift lay in making these dispersed knowledges align. He stood at the centre less as a despot than as a hinge. When later generations called him Sovereign of Bath, they meant not that he ruled as a prince, but that he made the town's many small sovereignties, musicians, chairmen, milliners, physicians, compose rather than compete. He could be theatrical when ceremony demanded it. There are stories, some embroidered, some plain, of him intercepting a duellist, of disarming a quarrel with a single line, of stepping forward to remind a late-arriving nobleman that the dance was already formed. The charm is not in the wit of these scenes, but in their brevity. He did not relish spectacle. He curtailed it. Each time a rule risked becoming a provocation, he made it into a pleasantry. Each time a pleasantry threatened to become license, he made it into a rule again. The alternation is the essence of polite amusement. Warmth, tempered by form. Under his watch, the pump room's morning music and the room's evening orchestra answered one another like antiphons. He did not conduct the former or lead the latter, yet his schedule made both necessary and punctual. The published lists of dances, country dances prominent, with minuets at the head when rank required the courtesy, were not inventions of taste, but calibrations of energy. Nothing too fast before tea, nothing too exhausting after, a balance of sets to keep conversation airing between them. The aim was not brilliance, it was endurance. Visitors could keep this up for a season because the season had been designed to keep unexceptional bodies comfortable. Critics existed, as they always do. Some clergy worried that gaming, however regulated, tempted beyond the line. Some moralists objected to mixed company. Some frugal men disliked subscriptions on principle. Nash's answer, implicit rather than argumentative, was that Bath traded not in licence but in predictability. If you disapproved, you could simply avoid the rooms. If you came, you knew what you came to. He had built in effect a contract. Pay, behave, belong. In a mobile society, postchaises from Bristol, coaches from London, visitors from Ireland and the West Country, that contract made strangers intelligible to one another in hours. His authority extended into clothing as a visible language of the rules. Boots belonged to the road, not the ball. Swords belonged to the field, not the floor. Extravagant displays that impeded movement did not suit a room whose purpose was circulating ease. He policed this not as fashion police, but as a superintendent of traffic. Clothing was equipment for the task at hand. You could be admired for a cap or a waistcoat, but only within the constraint that others must pass you without trouble. In Bath, display worked only as a species of cooperation. The economics of his post were curious. He received fees, gifts, and, by custom, deference that translated into dinners and services, yet he never turned the office into a tax farm. The sums that mattered most were not his but the town's. Subscriptions entered, nights well attended, disputes avoided, reputations preserved. The ledger of a season looked good when visitors returned. If he sometimes played the part of the grand manner, it was in the service of a city that could not afford to let either hauteur or chaos dominate. He aged in place, as men of systems often do. Fashions changed, rooms grew grander, music altered its manners, and the town acquired new crescents and walks that would outlive everyone who paid their first subscriptions under Nash's eye. Yet the kernel of his method remained. Post the rules, bow to the newcomer, start on time, keep the set intact, except that the cure of nerves and the cure of temper use similar instruments: light, measure, expectation, and the quiet bustle of servants whose competence goes mainly unrecorded. What makes his story belong to boring history is precisely this. He did not produce marvels. He produced the conditions under which nothing went wrong most nights. The absence of quarrels, of interruptions, of confused precedents, the lack of incident, became Bath's selling point. When you read later travel journals praising the town's civility, you are reading testimonials to a man who treated amusement as a civic utility and codified it into timetables and doorways. You may stand today in a long room of pale plaster and chandeliers and reconstruct the arithmetic he imposed. The breadth of the set, the count of steps, the number of candles per sconce to prevent smoke from staining the ceiling, the interval between dances for tea, the location of doors to prevent drafts on the infirm. None of this sparkles. All of it works. It is the dignity of the ordinary, enforced by a temperament that understood the difference between liberty and license in practical terms. Liberty is a room where many can take their turns. License is a room where a few take all the air. When you pause over his posted laws, you see their character. Not commandments from Sinai, but notices from a well-run household. That no person presume to wear boots in the ballroom. That no person take it ill that another goes before him, as no precedence is to be observed at the pump. That gentlemen and ladies punctually observe the hours. That gaming with strangers be avoided. That debt of honour be paid. Each line guards some small artery of the evening against blockage. Each assumes that people like themselves better when they are helped to behave. He died, as many organisers do. His system outlasted his purse. The town, grateful, attended his funeral in numbers, and with a public respect that registers how thoroughly he had become part of its fabric. The paradox is mild and instructive. A city devoted to well-managed pleasures gave a generous send-off to the man who had managed them, and then, the next night, resumed the schedule he would have approved. Morning, too, has its hours. You come away with a plain conclusion that feels adequate to the evidence. One man, by translating manners into measurements and amusement into a timetable, multiplied the number of people who could share the same rooms without harm. If health in Bath depended on regular glasses, steady walks and moderate baths, sociability in Bath depended on doorways that did not jam, dances that started on time, and a master of ceremonies who knew when to bow and when to forbid. And so you ask yourself, standing at the threshold of a room whose order he would recognise, if Beau Nash's rules made amusement safe for a whole town, what happened to Bath when fashion shifted and the authority to say begin, and enough, passed to others who liked novelty more than order? Did the music grow brighter at the cost of the room's calm, or did his quiet geometry continue to govern even when no one remembered who first drew the lines? You returned to the rooms the following evening not for spectacle but for procedure. Section by section, you assemble the system as Nash would have wanted it understood. Not as a romance of personality, but as a ledger of practices that kept a mixed company moving without friction. The closer you look, the less flamboyant the apparatus appears and the more exact. The less dramatic the rules, the more binding. In the quiet of preparation hour, before the candles are fully trimmed, before the musicians have taken their places, you watch the city's manners being laid out like the green baize on a card table, flat, smooth, and ready to absorb noise without advertising it. Begin with time. Nash's clock governed everything that could be made punctual, in an age when roads were mud in winter and dust in summer. The drinking of the waters at dawn, the morning promenade, the bathing intervals, dinner, assemblies, cards, these were not merely listed, they were coordinated so that one did not crowd the other. The aim was not to exhaust a visitor, but to occupy him steadily. Doors opened when they said they would. Minuets began on the stroke. Country dances formed at the indicated moment. Cards commenced when the dance set had reached its agreed pause. Those who came late discovered not fury, but indifference. The room had begun. Politeness here meant sparing everyone the fuss of waiting for someone else's convenience. Move to space. Nash's genius was to read a room as if it were a street. He refused bottlenecks. Entrances were kept clear. Chairs pulled back from thresholds. Musicians given a gallery high enough to keep bows from interfering with hats and heads. Card rooms placed adjacent to, not apart from, the dancing saloon, so movement between amusements did not require the breaking and reforming of company. He distrusted deep alcoves that encouraged huddles. He preferred the long vista that made every guest visible to every other. Seeing is part of civility. A room where one can be seen is a room where one thinks twice before behaving as if private. Distance, too, was regulated. In dancing, sets were laid out with room for figure and turn. In cards, tables were spaced so that a rising player did not jostle a passing lady. You measure the widths with your eye and realise this is traffic engineering applied to conversation. Then consider sound. Music was not noise here. It was the loom on which the evening's pattern was woven. Nash made orchestras useful by making them predictable. A band of adequate size, not ostentatious, placed where its tones could travel evenly, instructed to play at volumes that supported movement rather than demanded attention. The minuet required clarity. The country dance needed regularity. Card rooms nearby called for a buffer of doors and screens to keep the delicate mathematics of whist undisturbed. Tea created its own murmurous interval. The resumption of sets needed a crisp cue. These were not artistic decisions only. They were medical and moral in the Georgian sense, husbanding nerves and temper. Musicians were paid by subscription, not by applause. Their duty was to the room's order. Now look at paper, the city's other instrument. Names entered in subscription books by a single clerk's hand prevented quarrels over who had paid. Posted, lists of dances prevented disputes at the head of sets. Printed notices reminded all that no precedence is to be observed at the pump, and that no person presumed to wear boots in the ballroom. Receipts, tickets, and benefit bills were laid out with a legible type because legibility is civility in print. Letters of introduction passed to Nash saved the awkwardness of first approaches. His public bow joined names to faces. You begin to see the bureaucracy not as a hindrance, but as the memory of the town, an external conscience that allowed strangers to behave as if they had long been acquainted with the rules. Dress was treated as equipment. Boots, muddy, noisy, and suggestive of travel, were banned from the ballroom. Swords, which turned accident into catastrophe, were excluded. Hats were managed. Extravagant headpieces that threatened to eclipse neighbours were discouraged. Trains that trapped feet under their sweep were gently corrected. The rule was not taste for its own sake, but movement for all. Nothing worn should endanger the even flow. If someone arrived arrayed for conquest rather than for company, Nash's eye, and if needed his word, steered them back to the purpose of the room, which was ease under discipline. Gaming required a different tact because it excited the very nerve the water sought to soothe. Nash did not substitute prohibition for prudence. He set limits and enforced them as habits, not as scenes. Stakes were kept within agreed bounds. Strangers were watched without being insulted. Dealers known for fairness were preferred. Tables were cited where light fell cleanly, and assistants could attend to counters and cards. Debt of honour must be paid, the phrase itself a compromise between the disapproval of clergy and the realities of fashion, and those who tested the maxim found themselves corrected not by oration, but by exclusion. You notice the result. The hum at the card tables never rises to a pitch that would prick the dancers in the next room. Rank was handled with a paradox that made the town famous. Precedence, the glittering nuisance of 18th century society, was both recognised and neutralised. The first night a duchess might lead the minuet. On the second she took her turn. Country dances, more democratic in step and spirit, dominated the programme. Partners were assigned with an eye to ease rather than to display. Shy visitors found themselves drawn into sets without being stared at. Overbearing ones discovered that Bath's rules converted swagger into mildness. Nash's bow, offered equally to the eminent and the obscure, did the work of a sermon without a syllable. In this room, we proceed together. Habits beyond the rooms answer to the same governance. The pump room's morning cues, the walking between glasses, the polite routes of sedan chairs and bath chairs, the posting of fares, the order of bathing at King's, Queen's and Cross, these were threads in the same fabric. Nash did not run the baths or manage the chairman, but his public authority flattered theirs and theirs supported his. A town that can get an invalid into warm water at the right minute is a town that can also set a country dance on time. Chairmen learned to deliver visitors to doors without blocking the way. Beadles learned to arrange benches against walls where they helped conversation rather than impeded it. Pastry cooks learned when their buns would be most wanted. You begin to understand why Bath's prosperity looked inevitable for a long span. Every small profession discovered its hour and kept it. He also regulated absence, an underappreciated part of order. Private routes were discouraged on assembly nights, not because Nash detested intimacy, but because fragmentation injures a civic market. If half the town peels away to exclusive parlours, the orchestra plays to an echo and the card tables sulk. By concentrating company, the rooms became reliable. By being reliable, they justified subscriptions. By justifying subscriptions, they paid musicians, attendants, chandeliers, and beadles who in turn reinforced reliability. It is a circle, but a virtuous one. Where critics saw control, patrons saw convenience. Where poets strained for satire, shopkeepers saw sales. Anstey's verse in the New Bath Guide, kind because it mocked everyone, helped because it described without ruining. Satire, when affectionate, can function as advertisement. Visitors arrived prepared to be amused by their own preparations. They came rehearsed in the rituals they were to perform. Nash understood the value of being anticipated. A town is at its strongest when the newcomer already knows how to behave and wishes to be seen doing it properly. The rules, by being widely known, had less need of enforcement. You examined too the moral economy that kept the system from curdling into mere display. Politeness was not an ornament, it was a safety device. When duelling men left their swords at their lodgings, quarrels had to be postponed until they could be forgotten. When gaming debts were paid at once, resentment had less time to fester. When introductions were made publicly, scandal had less room to breed in private corners. Nash's interventions, recorded in many anecdotes with varying embroidery, are most telling when they are smallest. A raised eyebrow at an overloud laugh, a hand extended to a latecomer and then directed to a seat near the door, a set formed with partners distributed so that no cluster of partisans could dominate the floor. He governed heat by removing fuel, not by preaching against fire. His power, such as it was, rested on consent expressed through coin and custom. He could not compel attendance, he could not fine the negligent, he could not summon magistrates for misdemeanours that injured only taste. Yet his word carried because it saved trouble. Landladies advised newcomers to observe Mr. Nash. Chairmen spoke of Mr. Nash's night. Physicians appreciated that the rooms ended before nerves frayed past sleep. In a floating population of invalids, flirts, half-pay officers, widows and parsons, a figure who made the next hour predictable was worth his fee. He was, in modern speech, a coordinator, in Georgian language a regulator of amusements, in Bath's own idiom, the master of ceremonies. Of course, the city was changing under his feet. Architecture grew more ambitious. John Wood Circus and Royal Crescent translated the town's appetite for order into stone. What had been rules in a posting became curves in masonry. A circular walk without blind corners, a facade that gathered separate houses into a single disciplined frontage. Even those who never read Nash's notices walked inside their implications. The rooms themselves expanded, chandeliers multiplied, audiences grew more numerous and more confident. The paradox of success appeared. The larger the company, the greater the need for rules, and the greater the temptation to test them. You read the signs of strain. Fashion, which had made Bath, also made alternatives. Other spas courted visitors. London pressed its late hours upon provincial evenings. Novels encouraged an appetite for intensity over steadiness. Moralists redoubled their distaste for gaming. A generation rose that preferred novelty to ritual. Nash's own fortunes, like many gamblers, were less tidy than the order he prescribed. Gifts and fees could be generous, debts could be stubborn. He aged into a figure both respected and gently pitied, a living law whose purse did not keep pace with his legend. The town, indebted to him, did not always know how to pay the debt, yet the system endured because it had become impersonal. The posted rules were now habits. Even those who spoke slightingly of old-fashioned Bath kept to hours out of convenience. Even those who preferred sharper amusements elsewhere enjoyed here the relief of a timetable that did not flatter caprice. That endurance is the mark of a successful institution. When the founder's hand is no longer visible, and still the door opens and closes at the right minute, the orchestra cues the set without fuss, the card tables hum without scandal, and a stranger, stepping in for the first time, discovers exactly how to proceed without being told. It is helpful to trace a single evening through the machinery and observe how little requires personality and how much depends on arrangement. The chairmen deliver guests in a steady stream. Beadles relieve any small crowding at the threshold. The subscription clerk at his table accepts fees and enters names. The master of ceremonies bows to those unacquainted and pairs a few with partners. The orchestra begins with a minuet to oblige rank and then proceeds to country dances. After a measured set, tea is served in the adjoining room. Card players repair to their tables. A few who have promised themselves temperance stroll the perimeter. Instead, a child of the company is quietly taken home by a maid. A slight dispute over a place in the next set is extinguished by the simplest expedient. "Madam, if you please, the turn is hers tonight," and the matter dissolves not into resentment, but into relief. Candles are trimmed without suspending conversation. The hour of dispersal is observed. The street receives company once more, and sorts them into chairs and coaches with scarcely a raised voice. Nothing heroic has occurred, yet 200 souls, strangers for the most part, have shared space, time, and entertainment without incident. The mechanism has done its work. You note the city's special kindness to the infirm threaded through the evening. Chairs wait. Attendants know which steps are easiest. Doors are held without ostentation. Ladies who cannot stand long are given seats where they can still observe. Country dances provide figures that even stiff knees can learn. The orchestra does not indulge showpieces that punish nerves. The spa's commercial logic, sick visitors stay longer than the merely curious, aligns neatly with its moral one. Public amusements must not torment those for whom the waters are prescribed. Nash's law is thus more than fashion. It is a species of charity organised until it looks like convenience. Printed censure never vanishes. A sermon deplores cards. A pamphlet accuses assemblies of levity. An economy-minded squire complains that subscriptions are a tax on the vain. But letters written home tell the steadier tale, that the rooms offered conversation without peril, that the dances were decent and punctual, that the master of ceremonies spared many a shy cousin the misery of waiting unasked, that debts were paid and quarrels avoided, that early hours restored sleep. "Nothing to relate," one correspondent writes, which is, I think, the best news of all. Bath's boast is the absence of anecdote. The end of a rule-bound life is always instructive. When Nash's last years thinned, Bath furnished him the dignity he had furnished it. Attendance at his funeral notably full, recollections posted in print, subscriptions quietly raised to settle what could be settled. Then the next evening proceeded, as he would have wished under the same hour. The very impersonality he built was his memorial. The system did not falter when its author was no longer in the room. Those who cared to remember did so. Those who did not still benefited from a choreography they could not name. Stand again beneath a chandelier and read the geometry. How many candles to make light without heat? How far apart the card tables? How wide the set? How long the pause? How clearly the notice? How early the close? These are dry measurements, the stuff of caretakers and clerks, yet they build the commonwealth of an evening more surely than fine sentiments. In a century enamoured of liberty, Nash taught a quieter lesson, that liberty in company is the freedom to proceed, without hindrance because everyone agrees to small restraints. The laws of polite amusement were not a cage, they were a map. So you leave the rooms at the decent hour and ask yourself a question that belongs to all orderly places when fashions turn. Once a town has been taught to move by rules that keep strangers comfortable, what happens when novelty, louder music, later nights, sharper games, brighter jokes, tempts the next generation to prefer surprise to steadiness? Will Bath's quiet geometry still regulate the flow, or will the room yield inch by inch to amusements that entertain more fiercely than they sustain? You finish the ledger of practices by following Beau Nash past his own lifetime, because the strength of a rule is tested when its author is no longer present to enforce it. Bath in the later 18th century and into the early 19th did not become a different town overnight. It continued to be itself at a slightly altered tempo. This is how systems endure. They shift by degrees, not proclamations. You observe the continuities first, then the margins where fashion rubbed against habit and produced small frictions that tell you what the old laws accomplished. Continuity shows itself in the morning. The pump room still gathered visitors to music and warm glasses. Subscription books were still set out. The circuit between sips remained a measured walk whose pace varied with the season and the doctor's advice. The baths, King's, Queen's, Cross, went on with their steady business of immersions regulated by minutes and complexion, rather than by enthusiasm. Chairmen still knew the routes by gradient more than by name. Bath chairs still translated frail bodies into citizens of the pavement. These were the parts of Bath least susceptible to fashion, because they addressed basic needs with orderly tools. Nash had not designed them, but he had tuned the city so that their regularities became the cultural tone of the place. Evenings, too, continued along familiar lines. The assembly rooms, now grander in plaster and chandelier, preserved the geometry he preferred. A main room for dancing, adjacent rooms for cards and tea, galleries for musicians, doors placed to prevent traffic jams, notices posted in plain type, hours observed as if they were part of the cure. Masters of ceremonies after Nash, Tyson, Brereton and others did not attempt to replace his personality. They maintained his arrangement. They made introductions with less flourish, but with equal usefulness. They preserved the temperate rule that precedents could be bowed to once and then set aside. They watched the card tables with the same alertness for stakes that exceeded the room's nerves. They kept the lights trim, the sets intact, the dispersal punctual. Margins, however, widened. Fashion persuaded later visitors that music could be brighter, assemblies could run later, theatre could sell stronger sentiment, novels could furnish more intense expectations than guidebooks. London's hours drifted westward. Other spas imitated Bath while advertising small freedoms from its restraints. You see the effect in two places. At the card tables, where the appetite for higher play sometimes pressed against the posted cautions, and on the dance floor where the country dances began to share space with newer steps that asked for less patience and more display. The room did not collapse into disorder, but it did admit novelty in small spoonfuls, and novelty, once admitted, asks to stay for supper. This is precisely where Nash's old rules proved their continuing value. They did not forbid novelty, they framed it. A livelier air could be played, but it was played at the appointed moment, and the set ended on time. A sharper farce might follow the main piece at the Theatre Royal, but the curtain still fell at an hour that allowed sleep. A visiting gamester adept at exploiting strangers might take a seat, but the table, watched by a servant and a master of ceremonies, trimmed his sails with stakes set in advance. The system worked not by denying appetite, but by rationing it. A lesson that seems dull in print and yet does more to keep a town agreeable than any number of sermons. Printed voices continued their criticism. Clergymen objected that cards corrupt. Pamphleteers argued that assemblies flatter vanity. Moralists charged that public amusements weaken home ties. Those objections were not baseless in general. They were misplaced in Bath in particular, because the whole apparatus of the spa had been constructed to temper, not to inflame. The distinction matters. A town that teaches strangers to meet under rules that require introductions, moderate stakes, early dispersal, and public light builds moral restraints into physical arrangements. Nash had always treated rooms as tools, not as theatres for self-display. His successors, less famous, preserved the tools even when the audience's taste changed. Consider the economy that grew around this continuity. Landladies invested in steady turnover rather than windfalls. Pastry cooks planned batches by the known ebbs and flows of foot traffic. Milliners arranged deliveries to suit assembly nights. Chairmen kept accounts postponed if a regular was indisposed because the regular would be back next week. The absence of sudden riches, so attractive in satire, meant the presence of reliable incomes. Nash's laws, by raising the floor under behaviour, also raised the floor under livelihoods. A city cannot depend on miracles, it must depend on schedules. There is a quieter moral history running parallel to the economic one. The laws of polite amusement, no swords, no boots, no late intrusions, no precedence after the first bow, no debt of honour left unpaid, taught a lesson about equality that was not theoretical but practical. Guests accustomed to deference discovered that an evening ran better when deference gave way to turn-taking. Shy visitors learned that a timetable returns dignity to those who fear being overlooked. Invalids found that introductions and seats arranged in view, rather than in corners, protected them from the worst social strains. These are not grand achievements. They are the well-made hinges on which the door of a decent evening swings. They are also contagious. Men and women who learn to prefer a room that functions smoothly under small restraints are less tolerant elsewhere of rooms that do not. Nash's own story closes with the instructive severity time applies to such figures. He died with his system intact and his private finances unsettled, a gambler's end without drama. The town's generosity at his funeral, attended broadly, noted respectfully, meant what such ceremonies always mean when a city thanks a caretaker. We remember that our comfort had an author. The next night, the rooms opened at the same hour. Elegy is private, habit is public. It is fitting that his true memorial is an opening door. When you ask what his rules accomplish beyond Bath, you notice their echoes in other places that learn to manage crowds without turning them into mobs. Vauxhall's pleasure gardens with their pathways, lamps and music paced by supper hours. Provincial assemblies that adopted subscription models and posted notices in clear type. Seaside resorts that sold air and order as a pair. The spread was not instantaneous, but the idea travelled well. Amusement can be civic, and civility can be engineered. The engineering used paper, rooms, doorways, galleries, clocks and people, drilled in small competencies. It used neither violence nor constant admonition. This is what the 18th century at its most practical understood, and what Nash embodied, that freedom in company is built from many little abstentions agreed to in advance. You can make the assessment then without romance. Nash did not invent politeness. He translated it into a timetable. He did not abolish rank. He neutralized it at the door. He did not cure illness. He gave the ill a way to be public without humiliation. He did not forbid appetite. He taught it to arrive and depart on schedule. If his later reputation turned him into a character, a beau with anecdotes attached, that is because stories are easier to remember than systems. But the system is what mattered, and you can still reconstruct it from the survivals. The disposition of rooms, the printed notices, the hours, the wages, the routes, the habits of attendants who hold a door because the door must be held, not because a great person is behind it. You may ask whether such laws could have been made by committee had Nash never come. Perhaps. The need was present, the tools were available. Other towns tried similar measures with varying success. What he supplied was the first confident draft. He wrote the rules in large letters and stood near them long enough for the letters to imprint themselves on habit. After that, enforcement became memory. This is the ordinary arc of sound institutions. Initial zeal, then settled use, then quiet inheritance by people who cannot name the founder and do not need to. That is why his story suits a series on boring history. It is the kind of history that does not call attention to itself when it works. There is also a limit worth noting. No arrangement, however competent, can keep a town at the centre of fashion forever. Roads improve, other resorts rise, taste alters. The same steadiness that comforts the middle years of a century can look staid to the next. Bath did not become obsolete. It became a place for people who valued the very order Nash had supplied. The glamour moved periodically elsewhere, the utility remained. If you look for tragedy in this, you will not find it. A city built around convalescence and temperate pleasure is not meant to devour novelty. It is meant to survive it. From the vantage of your quiet series, the lesson has a wider application. Any public good that depends on strangers sharing space, hospitals, libraries, parks, trains, must translate courtesy into architecture and paper. Rules posted in clear type, doors wide enough for two people to pass without negotiation, moderate hours, light adequate to the task, routes that discourage obstruction, staff empowered to correct without humiliating. These are modern equivalents of what Nash insisted upon. They are dull to describe and indispensable in use, and when they work, nothing happens, which is exactly the point. You leave the rooms in imagination at the close of an ordinary night and tally the negativities that constitute success. No quarrel, no broken set, no crushed toe, no debtor absconded, no invalid chilled by a draught, no guest forced to wait in a corner unknown to the company, no servant abused, no hour exceeded. It is a ledger of no's that makes many quiet yeses possible. Yes to conversation, yes to dancing, yes to tolerable cards, yes to sleep, yes to another morning of waters taken without dread. You can almost hear Nash's voice without words in that list, the kind of governance that is content to be mistaken for mere good luck. So you conclude, in the tone that suits a city of warm springs and cool habits, that Beau Nash's laws of polite amusement were a civic technology. They made a place for the sick to be social, for the shy to belong, for the proud to relax, for the time-conscious to rely on the next hour. They did not promise happiness. They promised that an evening in company would proceed without waste. In the arithmetic of a spa town, that is a large promise kept by small means. The unresolved thought, suitable for a town that prized measured endings, is this. If every age must choose between surprise and steadiness in its public amusements, what happens when modern taste, impatient with timetables and gentle rules, rediscovers, after the noise has tired it, that comfort, dignity, and even a kind of quiet freedom still depend on someone's posted notice, someone's well-placed door, and someone's modest bow at the threshold. On paved crescents, a bath chair rolls, shawl tucked, hat straight, routes avoided ruts, licenses pinned. Mobility becomes decorous, and errands proceed without spectacle. You learn a city's character by the way it moves those who cannot move themselves. In Bath, the signature device is not the racing coach, not the postchairs glittering with harness and impatience, and not even the sedan chair shouldered by men who know every gradient by calf and lung. It is the bath chair, a wheeled armchair with a hood like a modest carriage, a handle or tiller for guidance, and the implied promise that a person who must not walk far can still be a citizen of streets and views. You come to it after a few days of the waters, when the physician recommends more air than your legs can easily earn, and you discover that a contrivance of timber, leather, brass, and common sense can turn the town into a gentle theatre in which you are no longer an onlooker from windows. You do not hail a bath chair with the same gesture you would throw to a hackney coach. You commission it. Chairs are kept in ranks along certain fronts: the pump room precincts, the assembly rooms, the theatre, the broad curve of the crescent, where proprietors maintain them as carefully as a violinist keeps his instrument in tune. Some are owned by chairmen who push them, some by small firms that also let sedan chairs and keep a book of fares, a few by lodging houses that boast of the convenience in their advertisements. A clerk's neat hand records the time you begin and the route agreed. The price, if you wish to avoid awkwardness, is settled beforehand. The city, long practised, posts customary charges for the popular circuits. Stand close and examine the thing itself before you sit. The body is a deep-seated armchair fixed upon a low chassis. 3 wheels are common, the 2 large ones at the rear, a smaller guide at the front, though earlier forms show experiments in 2 with outriggers, and later variants offer 4 with tighter turning. The seat is upholstered in stout fabric or leather that will not resent damp. The back is high enough to support the shoulders. A strap can be buckled discreetly if your balance is not to be trusted. The hood, leather or oiled canvas over ribs, sometimes glazed with a small mica or glass pane, can be raised against rain or a wind off the river. A footboard folds or slides. A lap blanket warms. Brass fittings betray the care of hands that polish between hires, hinges that do not squeal, catches that do not stick, screws that sit flush in countersunk holes, so clothing will not snag. The handle is a long, slightly arched bar or a forward tiller depending on the model. In either case, the propulsive body stands behind or to one side, not in front, because dignity, like safety, is a consideration. Sedan chairs and bath chairs share a purpose and differ in philosophy. The sedan is a box carried at shoulder height by 2 men. It takes you up steps as if steps did not exist, and delivers you to thresholds with a ceremonious swaying that flatters rank and offends neither ankle nor hem. It has precedence in narrow lanes and is a creature of quick corners and deep porches. It is, however, a transaction of strength. You feel the strain you do not bear. The bath chair, by contrast, makes a civil compact with gravity. It accepts the pavement's will, negotiates gradient by gradient, and insists that the road itself be a participant in your progress. You sit closer to the world, eye level with dogs and shop windows, close enough to hear the loaf crack under a baker's knife, to see the trailing ends of ribbons in a milliner's basket, to read a playbill without standing. The sedan lifts you, the bath chair admits you. That difference is not merely mechanical, it is social. Your chairman arrives with the light command of someone who has learned dozens of bodies and dozens of routes. He turns the chair a few inches to let you enter easily, small geometry that saves embarrassment, and sets the footboard. He does not fuss about your weakness. His questions are practical. Crescent and Circus, madam? Or the gardens by the river? Shall we cross the bridge, sir, and make the quiet turn by Walcott? Or would you have the gravel walk and back by the rooms? He knows, because the city has taught him, that routes are recipes, and that ingredients must suit stomachs. The steep pitch up to the crescent suits some on fine mornings and punishes others on damp afternoons. The camber on certain streets tilts a chair too much for those with fragile ribs. The rumble of wheels on sets near the Abbey is a dance tune to one patient and a trial to another. He holds these charts in muscle memory. You have a light shawl and the lap blanket over it. The hood is not yet up, the day looks generous. You settle. The chair moves with a first soft push, and you feel the town surface through the timber, in a way that walking forgot to teach you. Good paving produces a low hum like a contented hive. Bad patches speak in thuds. A boarded trench, a temporary inconvenience for pipes, offers a learned rattle that your driver anticipates with a little lean and a longer step to keep the motion even. He is in effect playing you across the street as a musician plays a phrase through a difficult passage. You are grateful and say nothing, because courtesy in a bath chair respects the silence of effort. The ordinary miracles of the machine reveal themselves gradually. The turning circle is tighter than you expected. The brake, a leather shoe pulled light to the rim, or a simple wedge applied by foot on steeper bits, works with the least show. The handle communicates your weight and his intention to each other without negotiation. On slopes, he leans forward to put power into the push. Corners, he adjusts his hands to use the chair's mass as counterpoise rather than burden. In crowds, he threads like a fish in a shoal, all nerves in the wrists. You feel less like cargo than like a participant in a duet, one playing the melody, the other the bass. Economics live inside the wheels. A bath chair can be hired by the hour or the half. The same man may own two and lease one to a younger cousin. A lodging house keeps one and contracts a chairman at a fixed rate for guests who come every season. A proprietor has a small shed for repairs, grease for axles, oil for leather, a brace of spare spokes, a tin of blacking for the hood. The chair itself is a capital outlay. The labour is the recurring cost. The streets are the marketplace. You discover, because you keep an honest ledger, that a fortnight's modest hiring adds up to less than a single imprudent gamble at faro would have cost you and delivers, in return, a social life that no card table can provide. The air, the streets, the glances, the seasonal education of seeing the same city each day under a slightly different sky. Etiquette follows the wheels as faithfully as grease. Passers-by do not stare at a person in a bath chair as if illness were a theatre. They yield a sliver of pavement without ostentation. Boys are corrected by a look before a jibe grows teeth. Dogs are called in good time. At crossing places, chairmen defer and advance by an instinctive code you will never learn fully, because you sit in it rather than practice it. A sedan comes first when the corner is tight, a bath chair first when the slope would grind a carried load. Coaches are avoided, not confronted. Riders are predicted a street away by the particular rhythm of hooves. The chairmen nod to one another with the efficient kindness of men who share a trade. Their language is practical. Hood if you please, brake below the pump, left side, the stones are sweeter there, and it saves tempers. Routes become biographies. The crescent route is for those who can bear a climb for the sake of a long sky. The circus loop is for people who want architecture at the length of an arm. The gardens by the river are for nerves that like trees in the slow company of water. The bridge and the old streets beyond are for people whose cure includes the normal bustle of buying pins and gloves and a fresh ribbon. The gravel walk teaches the town's genius in a straight line. Level ground, trees sheltering without gloom, benches placed where they do not interrupt, a vista that asks nothing argumentative of the eyes. In a bath chair you can have all these without taking a step, and yet you are not inert. You are riding the manageable edge of effort. Fair weather is the chair's natural element, but rain does not defeat it. The hood goes up with a brisk motion and becomes a private room with a moving window. Sound changes. The street is muffled to a drumbeat. Your own breathing seems louder. The smell of wet. Leather and damp wool is not unpleasant when the air is clean. Drops drum the hood and dart at the gap you leave for looking. The chairman's cap grows a valour of glittering beads that he shakes away with a quick toss at crossings. The wheels, now a little more sullen, accept the work. You will remember later that some of your best half hours in Bath were under a hood in a soft rain, when the town seemed to keep its voice low as if for a patient. Respectability is written into the device more deeply than comfort. To be seen in a bath chair is not to be pitied. It is to be understood as someone under care obeying a course. The chair allows you to appear in society without the exertion that would undo the morning's benefit. You can keep an appointment to take tea. You can present yourself at the rooms to watch a country dance from a position that does not trespass upon the sets. You can sit in the shade and be included in a conversation that would otherwise tire you if you had to stand. The chair converts frailty into a schedule rather than a spectacle. In a century that prizes independence, it supplies a different dignity, assisted autonomy. There is also a subtle politics. The bath chair democratises vistas. The Crescent, once the privilege of those who could climb for it, or hire a brisk sedan, becomes available to nerves and knees that cannot negotiate steps. The shop windows beyond the bridge, once the province of legs and good humour, open themselves to the weak and the stout alike. The chair widens the public of the town's beauty and business. In doing so, it enlarges the town itself. If a place is the sum of those who can use it without pain, then every turn of the chair makes Bath larger. A good chairman acquires a clinical eye without trespassing into medicine. He notices when colour drains and adjusts speed. He knows to stop a moment where the view is best and the breeze honest. He foresees the tricky gutter that jolts the ribs of anyone who has ever coughed too much in spring. He will suggest, if you are humble enough to accept, that today you had better keep to the walk and leave the Crescent for a brighter noon. Physicians rely on such men without confessing it in print. A prescription is strongest when the city helps administer it. You come to love small technicalities. The way the front guide wheel, when lightly lifted by the handle, skips a puddle without sending the rear ones through it. The feel of a perfectly greased axle that hums at one pitch on dressed stone and another on older sets. The cleverness of a footboard hinge that cannot pinch. The narrowness of the chair's overall width, just under the trick dimension that catches on certain posts. You call these details boring only if you have never needed them. If you have, they are the very grammar of liberty. Not all chairs are equal, and the town knows it. Some proprietors modernise, lighter frames, better bearings, hoods that do not billow in a wind. Some prefer the solidity that forgives sloppy maintenance. A few experiment with self-propelling cranks for riders who can manage arms better than legs. The market decides gently. The most comfortable for the price win the custom of those who talk to one another over tea. A lady whose lungs forbid hills will give you a list as exact as any apothecary's. Thomas on the walk. His chair is sweet and his hands better than his talk. Avoid the brown hood by the theatre. The brake catches and jerks on the descent. There are inevitably days when pride argues with prudence. You will wish to walk the short distance to the rooms to prove something to yourself. You will arrive drawn and silent, having misspent the morning's strength. The chair waits outside, an admission of need and a promise that need is not catastrophe. It is a mercy that looks like furniture. Take it and keep your place in the day. The city, if it could speak, would say that this is what it was built for, to turn weakness into a timetable rather than a sentence. Late afternoon is the hour when Bath chairs look most at home. The harsh errands of midday are done, the light has turned kinder and longer, the rooms have not yet filled, the shops are not harried. You see from within the hood's small world the town paying you the compliment of being interesting without demanding. A mason pauses to admire a line he has laid. A child counts windows along a facade. Two chairmen bargain amiably about the order in which they will take the hill. Your own body, which has been the chief subject of your thoughts for days, becomes less noisy. The chair has made you a spectator with rights. At the end of the circuit, your chairman swings the handle in a half circle and sets the brake with a foot. He offers an arm as you rise, not because you cannot stand, but because the transition between sitting and standing is the exact spot where many find their courage thin. He folds the footboard with the same small respect with which he opened it, touches the hood, and waits without impatience while you decide whether to go in or to sit a minute longer and let the air finish its work. The ledger in the proprietor's book will add a modest line. Your ledger, kept inwardly, if not on paper, will add a stronger one. Air taken honestly. You come to the plainest conclusion after a week of such tours. The Bath chair is not romance, not elegance, not speed. It is a municipal virtue shaped into wooden wheel, a promise that the town will meet you halfway. It trains the eye to look at ordinary things long enough to like them again, and it trains the pride to accept assistance without surrender. If a city deserves praise, it is for devices like this that join rather than separate, that admit rather than exclude, that turn illness into a route rather than a room. And so you end the day with a small, disquieting gratitude that asks the question any instrument of dignity asks once it has been adopted. If your strength returns enough to walk, will you remember the compact the chair taught you? That mobility is a shared craft, and keep the habits of yielding pavement, watching gradients and timing effort that the chairman practiced? Or will you forget the slow intelligence of wheels the first time you feel swift again? You decide to understand the chair not only as experience but as trade. because in Bath every comfort that seems inevitable rests on someone's ledger. A Bath chair is a livelihood first and an emblem afterward. To sit in one is to enter a small economy with its own prices, tools, risks and routines. An economy that, by steadying your day, steadies the cities. Begin with supply. Chairs come from workshops that also build lighter garden vehicles, perambulators for infants of the better sort, and the sturdier trucks used in back lanes to move crates. The same hands that mortise a wheel hub for a brewer learn to mortise one for a gentleman's comfort. Timber is selected with temper in mind, ash for spring, oak for strength, beech, where a smooth curve must be shaved thin. Wheel rims are bound with iron if the proprietor expects rough going, left as hard wood if he trades on smoother pavements and wants less weight. Upholstery is chosen for honesty rather than fashion. Leather cracks in cold unless dressed properly. Stout ticking accepts damp and dries without sulk. Makers speak of grain and set, as if they were talking about character, and in a sense they are. A good chair begins with wood that does not argue under strain. Prices are plain enough to be posted, yet flexible enough to reward skill. By the hour, by the half, by the day if your doctor has ordered long airings. A supplement for the hill if you insist on the crescent after rain. A small fee if the hood must be dried by the fire and brushed afterward. Chairmen absorb these figures until they are muscle memory. When a visitor asks what will it be to the gardens and back, the answer comes lightly, the tone more important than the number. If you become a regular, you will learn that numbers move as kindness moves. A chairman with your temper in mind will trim a shilling on days when you decide, wisely, to forego a climb. You repay him with the currency that keeps this city strongest, repeated custom. Behind the obvious transaction lies the less visible arithmetic of upkeep. Axle grease, lamp oil for early or foggy dusk, brass polish, leather dressing, spare bolts and cotter pins tucked into a tin at the back of the shed, a rasp for smoothing a nicked footboard, sailmaker's needles and waxed thread to restitch a hood seam the wind worried. Wheelwrights keep hours posted and seldom keep them because trade is when trouble arrives, not when clocks agree. A spoke cracks not at 10 o'clock Tuesday but at the bottom of a hill on Saturday, when a stranger puts his full weight wrong at the very moment your man must lean back on the handle. Repairs are, therefore, half skill and half intention. Keep everything just tight enough. Keep nothing so tight it splits when stressed. The human element is the true spring. Chairmen are hired for hands and wind and for the temper that lets them work in company without making scenes. Many have pushed for a decade and know more about gradients than any map. They can tell you why a left-hand traverse on the hill gives a kinder camber, how to take the bend by the baths without asking a sedan to do the impossible, where the gutter runs a little high and will catch the small guide wheel if you do not lift at the exact moment. They also know the pulse of invalids so well they could almost lay a hand on your wrist through the handle. Hands speak through handles. A chair's bar transmits not only your weight but your breath, how often you lean forward, how heavily you settle when tired. And a good chairman listens with his palms without claiming to doctor you. Training is old-fashioned and exact. A boy begins by polishing brass, learns to fold and latch the hood without pinching fabric, graduates to pushing an empty chair in the lane at the back, then to moving one with a sack of sand in the seat to simulate a passenger, then to a slow loop with a forgiving aunt who laughs when he stalls. Only after he has learned to judge distance to within a finger in a doorway will he be trusted with a paying customer. He's not told this progression is a curriculum, he's told it is the way. You recognise the city's strength in that phrase. Bath excels at converting habit into a school. Etiquette is part of training. The chairman is invisible when the conversation in the chair turns private. He's audible when caution requires it. Brake, he says once on the steep. Hood, he asks when the wind freshens along the river. Step, he warns when a sudden paving fault approaches. He never says no to a route. He says, "Perhaps the walk today, sir," and lets the caution rest where sense will find it. He keeps a running register of other chairmen's positions without staring. He knows who is behind him at the turn without turning. He calls a boy out of the way with a sound that is neither shout nor whisper, and is obeyed because it never scolds without cause. You watch this with the grateful curiosity of someone being carried through a competence you do not possess. Routes, once you learn to read them, are topographical prescriptions. The Crescent belongs to clear mornings and quiet lungs. The circus loop is an architectural balm best taken when the air is still. so the sound of wheels on stone becomes a steady music. The gardens soothe when nerves have shaken from too much company. The bridge is brisk, a tonic of commerce, a test for those who must relearn the noise of life without flinching. A chair route can be the exact counterpoison to your habit. If you hide from bustle, the chair gives you bustle in manageable drafts. If you crave views beyond your strength, the chair rations views into cups you can hold. You begin to see why doctors write chair on the same line where they write waters. Both are doses, both must be timed. Accidents are rare because the city has been taught to prevent them. Streets are swept often enough that sharp stones seldom lie long. Gutters are kept honest because chair wheels complain if they are neglected. Corners are made polite by trimming back the encroachments that would pinch a hood. When mishaps occur, their very description tells you how unusual they are. A wheel went to ground at the lower curb by the Abbey means the curb was high or the angle wrong. Both are corrected before noon on market day, because too many eyes saw the difficulty to let it stand. The city repairs itself in public where its tools are used in public. Weather is not an enemy. It is a second clerk who must sign every route. Wind wants the hood lowered a notch lest it billow like a sail and make the chair its own ship. Rain wants a slower pace for the sake of brakes and the temper of those who pass. Ice, rare but memorable, wants the chair to keep to streets where sand has been thrown down by lads with baskets who learned from men with scars. Summer heat wants shade and a lapcloth dipped and wrung out and spread over the blanket to cool the knees. Autumn damp wants the oilskin that makes a private tent, and the knowledge of where a snug corner receives a temporary shelter without blocking anyone else's way. The chair is a compromise between inside and out, and the chairman is the treaty maker. Sedan chairs are still pressed into service where steps and narrowness make wheels nonsense. The two trades speak to one another like cousins. A chairman who carries will call his wheeling friend to the door that opens onto a lane with breadth. The wheeler will hail bearers when the fashionable front steps resist ramps. The city is their shared map. If you watch on a busy evening near the rooms, you will see a courtesy ballet. A sedan glides straight to the door, the bearers set down, the occupant alights, the bath chair slips behind and takes the corner wide to clear the little swell of people. The coachman waits with the patience of someone who understands that tonight he is road's end, not king of it. No raised voices, little waste. Habit is again the author. Charity has its place. Parish funds once paid alms. In a spa town, benevolence also pays fares. A widow of small means, ordered air by a conscientious doctor, may find a small brown envelope left by a lady who sits 3 pews ahead, for chairs this week, without any signature. A subscription list at the pump room appears quietly in late winter for invalids in necessity. It is filled, equally quietly, by those who do not care to have their names rehearsed. Chairmen themselves sometimes forgive a hill when they see pride wrestle with purse. This is not sentimentality. It is the knowledge that steady. Trade depends on broader inclusion than strict coin can purchase. Letters sent home from Bath often mention chairs the way you mention weather, as a condition of days. I am taken out by chair every afternoon, writes a cousin, and so meet the world without the fatigue of it. I see the bridge, and have no quarrel with its stones. Another. The gardens please me more from the chair than from my poor legs. I saw the trees without measuring them by breath. These are dull sentences to read until the day you need to write one like them, and feel their relief line by line. Ordinary instruments tend to be praised only by those who discover their ordinariness is mercy. There are also rules written nowhere that govern dignity. A chairman never warms his hands at your fire. He never drinks from your cup unless pressed almost rudely. He never tells the landlady how far you went. He never comments on your face when you come back paler than you left. If you must stop for breath, he turns the chair slightly so that you look onto a view, not a wall. If a friend hails you in the street, he arrests forward motion half a yard sooner than necessary to make room for the exchange and gives the impression of having meant to pause there all along. Such courtesies protect the cure from the humiliation that often accompanies bodily limits. You begin to think of the chair less as a service and more as a screen, thin, mobile and kind. Your own view of distance changes. Before the chair, the Crescent was far, the theatre too much, the gardens perhaps tomorrow. After a week, you measure differently. The Crescent is 1 hill, the theatre 2 corners, the gardens a quarter hour and a bench. This recalibration is not childish, it is craft. Sailors measuring knots, masons counting courses, needlewomen tallying stitches. Each trade teaches its own units. The bath chair teaches streets in sips. Economy at home alters as well. You discover that a fortnight of modest hires costs less than the new gown you considered when you arrived, and gives you more use in company. You find that a tip given for a difficult descent returns to you as a watchful hand on days when your mind is elsewhere. You realise that the young man who began by polishing brass has learned your doorbell and steps aside for your maid without being told. Money in Bath behaves like oil. When applied in small regular drops, it reduces friction everywhere along the route. There is too the question of reputation. To be known as someone who goes out daily by chair is to be known as someone who keeps the regimen. You belong to a class that includes half-pay officers mending a wound, clergymen coaxing lungs, widows recovering from winter grief, children urged into the open to cure a habit of pallor. It is an unranked company, and its visible emblem is the hood that lifts and lowers along the same streets at the same hours. The city takes pride in such visibility, because it proves the spa's seriousness without ceremony. You may not love being seen, you will, in time, love being included. Not all owners are equal, and you will learn to choose. A chair with stiff hubs makes you feel every ill-kept stone. One with a lax brake makes every descent a negotiation. A handle set too low tires a shorter man and makes him clumsy. A hood that creaks will wear your patience in a quarter hour. Conversely, a chair that rolls the way good prose reads, without snag, changes your temper. You choose Thomas for the walk, Eliza's brother for the hill, the green-hooded one for rain because the seam never leaks where others do. You will forget these names when you leave Bath and remember only the chair, as if one device had followed you all season like a discreet servant. The truth, that your comfort came from the hands and tools of many, belongs to the modest history this city trades in. The day will come when your doctor, testing success against caution, suggests, "A little walking now, but keep the chair." You take 5 minutes on your own feet and then sit, not in defeat but in prudence, and ride the rest. The chair becomes less a necessity and more a companion that teaches you how not to waste what strength has returned. Its presence checks your foolish desire to spend everything on the first hill. In this way, the object that once seemed to declare your weakness becomes the teacher of your new restraint. At the margin of improvement lies a tender pride. You set the hood yourself one afternoon. You fold the blanket with your own hands instead of letting the chairman do it. You offer the suggestion, "The walk today? I slept poorly," as if this were merely preference and not confession. He accepts it as preference and says nothing about your eyes. It is a minor collaboration, and it feels like a major one. So the chair proves what Bath as a whole demonstrates, that a city can make illness public without making it shameful, can turn dependence into a shared craft, and can convert private frailty into a timetable that includes music, shops, views, errands, and friends. You begin to ask, quietly, because the day has gone well, whether when you leave you will miss the chair more than you expect. Not because you will need it, but because it taught you to apportion your hours more wisely than you used to do. And if that is true, when the first burst of health tempts you to walk too far in your own town, will you remember the slow voice of timber and wheel and stop in time? Or will you throw away in one afternoon the steady gains you made by yielding to a humble machine? You finish the chair's education on a day when improvement and prudence shake hands. Your doctor says, in that practical tone Bath teaches, "Walk a little, ride a little," and writes nothing further because the city will supply the rest. You choose the route like a recipe you now know by heart. A few yards on foot along the pump room, front to test the ankles after the waters, a seat in the chair for the gentle ascent toward the circus, a pause where the trees in the gravel walk sift light into a pattern the nerves accept. What begins as convalescence has become craft. The chair is not merely conveyance, it is a tutor in portioning strength. You recognise, with the affection owed to well-made tools, that the chair has taught you to prefer sufficient things to splendid ones. A walk undertaken exactly to the limit you can sustain feels more dignified than a climb that proves you brave and leaves you undone. A view taken sitting, at the right hour, with the lap blanket arranged and the hood half raised against a teasing breeze, outlives a view captured by force and paid for in sleeplessness. The chair has cured not only mobility, but a vice you did not know you cultivated, contempt for moderation. It has done so without reprimand. Timber, wheel, and a gentlemanly break have given you back your day by asking you to accept terms the body can meet. There is, in any course of treatment, a small pivotal hour when gratitude turns from the physician to the place. You feel it as the chair noses into the curve of the circus, and the houses, perfectly paced, austere, content, recognise you as someone who now belongs to their quiet geometry. The chairman eases the handle a little lower on the descent to the theatre road. You note the surety of his step on the sets, and you remember that competence is a civic charity. The chairman, the wheelwrights, the boys learning hinges and polish, the beadles who keep corners clean of obstructions, the landladies who fold blankets dry, these form the spa's invisible orchestra. Without them, the score would not be playable. Because you are a student of ordinary things, you pay a visit one afternoon to the workshop where chairs are mended and made. The door opens on the smell of wood, shaved thin and leather dressed honestly. A wheel lies on trestles like a patient. A spoke is being replaced with the deft fussiness of a man who enjoys doing a job exactly once. He shows you, without ceremony, the joint that must never be starved of glue, the angle at which the handle meets the chassis, so that a smaller person can push without straining wrists, the rivets that must sit proud enough to take a file later but not so proud they will catch a shawl. You ask because the chair has made you curious, whether modern improvements tempt him. He nods. Lighter rims, better bearings, hoods that shed water more cleanly. But then he says a sentence that fits Bath's temper better than any flourish. There is a point at which a thing ceases to forgive its owner. He builds to the forgiving point and stops. On your way back you pass two scenes that complete the device's moral. The first is a lady of rank in a sedan borne briskly up the steep to the rooms, her bearers moving with that ceremonial rhythm which flatters the carried and stiffens the back of the trade. The second is an elderly curate in a bath chair, hood raised, hands gloved, listening to a child, his grandson perhaps, recite the week's small triumphs and misdemeanours as if the chair were a confessional on wheels. The sedan declares precedence. The chair advertises participation. Both are needed in a town that honours order. But you find your heart given to the contrivance that turns weakness into sociability rather than into spectacle. The inevitable near accident arrives, as all instructive things do, without melodrama. A plank has been laid across a shallow trench near the abbey. Wind has lifted one end a finger's breadth. A boy, racing thoughtlessly, catches it with his heel and jolts a passing chair sideways. Your own chairman, 2 yards behind, reads both the plank and the boy in a single glance, shifts his weight, lifts the guide wheel, and passes with a change of tone so slight it is music more than motion. The boy is collared gently by a beadle, and released with a look that promises repetition would be unwise. By the time you reach the pump room door, the plank is weighted with a stone. The city corrects itself as quickly as a good sentence receives its comma. You realise why Bath avoids tragedy without pretending to abolish hazard. There are hands everywhere making the small repairs that keep life ordinary. In the evenings you grow bolder, not in distance, but in presence. The chair allows you to be in rooms you once left early. You learn where to sit in the assembly room so that you observe the country dances without obstructing a set. You take tea on the precise side of the table, where the hum is sociable but not taxing. You leave when the hour reaches the limit you and the doctor and the chair have quietly agreed. At cards you stand for one rubber, then sit and watch the arithmetic of a game you like better in theory than in practice. No one urges you to stay. Bath has never made a religion of late hours. You return to your lodging by chair and find that sleep arrives as a matter of course when a day has respected its own scale. Because this is boring history you count for the pleasure of it, the negative achievements the chair has made possible. No stumble at curbs, no quarrel at crossings, no pride injured, no appointment missed, no temper lost for want of a bench at the right place, no evening spoiled by the single decision to push a little farther than wisdom allowed. You need no memoirist to tell you what a blessing it is for a town to fill its days with the absence of incidents. The chair excels at preventing stories. That is why those who do not need it overlook it, and why those who do will praise it without any desire to have their praise remembered. Your last week in Bath draws near, and with it the old traveller's ritual of looking twice at what will soon be once. The chair participates in this valediction. You touch the hood rib with the odd gratitude one reserves for objects that have observed, without prying. You bring a ribbon for the chairman's young daughter because you have learned the scale on which kindness pays its debts here. Not with display, not with coin alone, but with tokens that enter the life of the household. You arrange, without making a business of it, to leave the lap blanket behind for someone who will need it next winter, more than you need the memory of it. The proprietor acknowledges this with the brevity of a man who has seen such decencies often enough to keep them from turning into theatre. Departure day comes, and you do the thing that proves a convalescent has become a citizen. You set out early for a last small circuit by chair, down along the river where the water moves with the seriousness you have learned to admire, up toward the Crescent just far enough to see the stone catch morning, across the bridge where shopkeepers lift shutters in a tempo that matches your season. The chair turns into your lodging street with that particular softness, which means the man behind knows he will miss you a little, and you, without romantic exaggeration, will miss him too. When the trunk straps are buckled and the chaise is called, when your landlady has accepted thanks and you have refused politely to say goodbye to the pump room orchestra, because leave-takings are best abbreviated, the chairman brings the chair close and rests his hands on the handle a moment longer than duty requires. You say what Bath has trained you to say when a device has served its purpose without fuss. You have kept me to my course. On the road home your thoughts arrange themselves into a ledger of continuations. You mean to keep the morning's regularity, the modest distances, the habit of air, the dislike of late hours that trespass on sleep. You're not under the illusion that your own town will supply a bath chair and a chairman, but you have learned to give yourself the chair's counsel without the chair, to walk to the point of goodness and no farther, to sit where the view is kind rather than enticing, to treat appetite as a friend to be met at the proper hour, and not as a ruler to be obeyed in all moods. You have also learned a charity you once believed belonged to others, to step a little aside on the pavement without display, to hold a door for someone who moves in a private timetable, to arrange a chair in a corner of your own room where a visitor may sit without being excluded. Instruments of dignity make better hosts of those who have used them. Return gives the promised test. A neighbour, pleased by your colour and general steadiness, suggests a long walk to clear the lungs properly, and for an instant pride warms to the dare. You decline, cheerfully and without defence, and propose a shorter route with a bench you now carry in imagination. The bench exists because the chair taught you to place it there. You have learned to furnish your own town with the kindness Bath built into its public rooms. Later, that week you climb your own stairs without pausing on the landing for the first time in months and feel three emotions in right order: gratitude, caution, and the desire to repeat the same tomorrow rather than to exceed it today. The chair is not present. Its discipline is. You write letters the way convalescents have always written, modestly, with the old world ordered into sentences that do not demand sympathy. You give advice reluctantly and only when asked, and even then you speak not of waters and music but of chairs and walks and the schedule of appetites. You find that the only eloquence you have acquired is a taste for exact nouns: axle, brake, hood, handle, camber, sets, slope, shelter. It pleases you that life can be improved by speaking the language of things that work. The thought that attaches itself to the chair, as you consider its place in the history you favour, is a conservative one. Civilization is kept not by sudden greatness, but by the regular use of forgiving tools. The chair forgives a misjudged day. It forgives a hill undertaken on a mean wind. It forgives a pride that sets out too fast and sits meekly after two streets. A society that designs such tools and gives them ordinary honour, that allows them to be hired without shame, to be seen without spectacle, to be maintained without fuss, has chosen permanence over fashion. You recognise in this the old lesson your series prefers. Boring institutions protect delicate goods. You can admire modern contrivances without discarding the old principle. Today's cities have their equivalents to the bath chair in ramps no one notices until they are needed, in benches that do not scold the idler, in timetables that allow the hurried to become the punctual. When a street admits the less nimble without humiliation, it is practising the same art Bath mastered with handle and hood. You do not press the analogy too loudly. Your taste forbids preaching. You simply say, to those who ask what you learned at the spa, that it taught you to move at a human scale, and to respect the devices by which the weak are kept in company with the strong. The chair retires from your days the way a good servant retires from a room when the conversation turns private, before you notice, and without leaving a clatter. But you continue to see its shadow in your manners. You take the left side, the stones are sweeter there. even when you're on new paving in another town. You hear the word break in your head. As you come to a decision that would spend more than it pays back, you find yourself yielding at corners with the memory of two chairmen nodding their compact. Civility, once learned through wood and wheel, travels better than you would think. If you must give the bath chair a final place in your ledger, it belongs among those inventions that increase the population of a city without building a single house. Each person who could not, by reason of lungs or joints or general constitution, have used the town now does. Each view that would have been the monopoly of the sound becomes common property by means of a hood and a handle. Each errand that would have gone untended is now possible. This is growth of the most conservative kind, the enlargement of use by the improvement of means. It is not the sort of progress that fills a print with fireworks. It fills a day with decent errands and an evening with bearable noise and a night with unbroken sleep. You do not need a monument to commemorate that. You need only the sound a well-oiled axle makes on clean stone. You end, as a student of modest history should, with a question rather than a flourish. When strength returns, and it will to the degree Providence allows, will you remember the treaty the chair negotiated on your behalf, and keep to the measured distances that let your days be usefully full? Or will you break terms the moment pride finds a hill and lose, in one afternoon of overreaching, the quiet liberties a wheeled armchair taught you to preserve? Rain slicks the lanes, bearers test straps, choose high routes, fares agreed by nod, curtains lowered, and society moves dryly between doorways without hurry. You learn the true measure of a spa city when the weather turns against it. Sunshine flatters stone and widens streets. Rain discovers the joints of a town, the seams where politeness must become craft. In Bath, nothing performs better under grey skies than the sedan chair, a narrow-shouldered box carried by two men moving as one, its leather curtains shining with drops, its brass bright despite the day, its small door opening like the lid of a reliquary to admit and then protect those who could not, should not, or would not be drenched. You may love the bath chair's gentle wheels, you may admire a coachman's flourish on a dry afternoon, but in rain you trust the sedan. It does not ask the street for leave. It takes it, cleanly, and returns it as soon as the threshold is gained. The chair, standing at rest, looks deceptively simple. A short carriage without wheels, its boxes of stout timber panelled and painted, its roof arched to shed water, its sides curtained in oiled leather, with mica or glass panes that give a modest view. At each side strong iron rings receive the poles, elm or ash when the bearers lift and set. The door faces the pavement, not the street, because the chair is a citizen of the footway and will not bargain with wheels for passage. The interior is padded, plainly if the proprietor is honest, fussily if he courts rank, with a narrow seat, a strap, and sometimes a small lamp fitting for late returns. The floor is no more than a step above the street, yet it feels like another country when rain hammers the leather and the bearer's boots strike in time. On a dry morning, the chair waits in ranks, by the pump room, under the room's grand portico, along the theatre front, in a bay near the Crescent where the gradient is steep, and favours strength over wheel. Each rank shows its discipline. Poles lie on trestles to spare the bearers' backs while they bide. Hoods are dressed with blacking. Brass is wiped to a modest gleam. Fares are posted in a printed hand under a small sheet of horn or glass. So much from pump to rooms, so much to the theatre, so much to the Crescent. The hill extra when the rain has made the stones slick as glass. These lists are not merely prices, they are a peace treaty. Visitors can pay without haggling, chairmen can ask without apologising, and the town can keep tempers even when the weather makes everybody unreasonable. When the first proper shower comes, fat drops that write dark sentences across the abbey flags, the chairmen stand, not with drama, but with that brisk tidiness the trade requires. Poles are slid through rings, leather curtains are dropped and tied, caps are pulled down, a last wipe is given to a step. The first calls arrive with the frankness rain gives to rank and to invalids. Chair, from a woman who will not have her silk degrade into a rope. Chair, quickly, from a gentleman whose gout dislikes any increase in weight. A raised hand from a physician who must cross to a patient without arriving like a drowned rat. The chairmen nod, no need to run yet, and move their box to the lip of the pavement where the doorway will be met without puddle. Then begins the craft you will love if you value ordinary competence. The front bearer takes pole and balance. The rear bearer sets his shoulder and his pace. They lift without grunt or flourish. The chair rises to a level that spares both back and temper. And the pair step away at a rhythm you will come to recognise as right. Brisk enough to make the reign's demand short, smooth enough to keep the occupant steady. In rain, sedan precedence is undisputed at corners. A coach's great wheel might skid, a wheeled chair might balk. The sedan turns on the space of its own length and threads obstructions that would defeat any axle. The bearers shift their course half a foot to avoid a new river crossing the street. They step together to mount a curb. They shorten stride for a patch of setts polished by too many years of hooves and boots. The chair's swaying is ceremonial rather than clumsy, a movement that honours both the box and the body within. Roots in rain are not the same as roots in fair weather. On a dry day, the chair may glide through the abbey yard and take the straight line to the rooms. In wet, the bearers cheat the wind with a longer curve, hugging walls that shelter, choosing lanes where the camber throws water toward gutters rather than toward ankles. The quickest path on the map is not the driest path underfoot. The men who carry know, by a knowledge earned in calves and lungs, exactly where a drainpipe spits on the hour, which eaves leak onto the pavement, which shopkeeper lays a board true across a mud seam, and which lays it too lightly. They avoid a particular cellar grating because last month a heel slipped there and turned a minor errand into a major lament. They choose the narrowest streets in the heaviest fall. Less sky means less water upon the leather, and fewer chances for wind to lift a curtain. Turning at a door is a separate art. The front man calls the angle in a word, right. That is more rhythm than speech. The rear man feels the pole's slight torque through wet leather and adjusts. The box swings like a large punctuation mark and comes square to the step. Bearers in Bath will not let you descend into a puddle if they can help it. They set the chair so the door opens to the smallest wetness, and the front man, by old custom, gives his shoulder to steady a hand without looking at it. The tip, if custom is observed at the end of the night rather than at the beginning of the day, will be the same as in dry weather. Rain does not increase price, it increases gratitude. Fares appear plain on the printed board, but rain creates conditions under which custom adds appendices. The hill extra is not greed, it is physics. The Crescent in wet weather is a sermon against folly. To require men to bear a person in a box-up dressed stone glazed by rain is to purchase their future lameness at a discount. The additional shilling keeps the team sound for the season. You see the wisdom in such small additions when, on a particularly mean evening, several proprietors agree without meeting to shift a penny from their own profit to a lamp boy who keeps the corner by the rooms tolerably lit. His ladder and flask reduce accidents. Therefore he belongs to the chairman's prosperity as surely as a wheelwright does. It is not charity, it is a dividend. The chair's interior in rain becomes a little liturgy of care. A towel lies folded on the seat for the hem of a wet cloak. A small brush rides in a loop for whisking away grit before grit becomes mud on upholstery. A spare strap waits for a parcel that must be held from the floor. A cork fits the lamp bracket if the occupant wishes a little light and the route is dark. The air inside carries the honest smell of leather warmed by breath. If you leave a faint circle of damp on the cushion, it will be dried before the next hire by a man who knows that comfort is cumulative. Chairs acquire the memory of those who used them. The best acquire only the memory of dryness regained. Etiquette in rain is both stricter and kinder. Stricter, because the streets shrink, chairmen use their voices with authority. Boys learn to yield sooner. Dogs are called back a yard earlier. Shop lads pause with casks and let the chair pass, rather than attempting to share a corner. Kinder, because everyone sees the labour, no one resents the precedence. A gentleman whose hat is ruined steps aside for a lady under leather without theatrics. A clergyman tucking his cassock does not claim the right of way at the room's door if a chair is turning. He knows that rank is less than momentum when rain is falling. The master of ceremonies, who on dry nights presides over dancing, escorts the chair's door through a small press with the same bow he gives in the ballroom. Rain simplifies many arguments. Training for rain begins before a boy lifts a pole. He learns to oil leather so drops bead and run, to wax laces so knots can be unpicked with numb fingers, to hear the difference between good rain, straight, honest, falling to be met, and dirty rain that skews in gusts and requires a different stance at corners, to test pole balance without letting a wet hand slip. He is taught how to shoulder a weight while descending slick steps. Heel low, toe out, knee soft, eye on the front man's neck. He practices setting a chair down on a tilted flagstone so that a lady's foot finds certainty and not a surprise. When he at last carries for hire in wet weather, the city can trust him to do the work without becoming the story. History gives the trade its backbone. Before coaches bullied streets, before any bath chair rolled under a hood, men carried people in boxes. The sedan, in that sense, is older than the Crescent and as old as the Spring's fame. Regulations posted by corporational rooms kept order. Licenses to carry. Numbers painted modestly. Fines for obstructing doors or quarrelling at ranks. Limits on hours lest fatigue make accidents. The rule that no man, wet as he is, brings drips and mud into an entrance hall. The chairmen enforce most of this on themselves because their bodies pay first for disorder. A man who slips and wrenches his back does not earn for a fortnight. His partner must find a substitute. His household eats the cost in silence. Rules posted under horn are simply public acknowledgements of trade prudence. Rain changes conversation within the chair. In fine weather you may chat with a companion through a lifted curtain. In wet you speak short and to the point. Directions become a code. Bridge? No, the walk. Rooms? The side door. Theatre? Take the lower street. You do not ask idle questions of a man whose breath is dearer in hills. If gratitude must be expressed, it is expressed 2 doors later when he has set the chair and drawn a freer air. Bath's poise comes from such economies of speech, learned in trades and copied by visitors. Sedan routes have names that do not appear on maps. There is the musician's cut from the pump room to the rooms, sheltered enough to spare a violinist's case. The lady's turn by which the chair bows straight into a particular house's side porch, where a private step has been cut from stone. The doctor's line, which skirts the meanest camber near the baths and never jolts a person already bruised by coughing. The theatre slip, narrow but quicker, used after the farce when too many coaches are calling at once. These names are not flags for tourists. They are the vocabulary of competence. If you ride, often enough you will come to say them yourself and receive a small nod for knowing words money cannot buy. At some thresholds, priority reverses. A sedan yields to a bath chair if the latter carries someone who cannot bear to stand long while doors are arranged. A chair yields to a sedan where steps are so tight that a wheeled device would wedge the line. Such accommodations are old and unargued. Rain washes away pettiness. The men know whose work would be undone by stubbornness and whose comfort would be spoiled by 2 minutes' delay. The city is full of these minute recognitions, and they are a greater courtesy than any bow at a card table. Proprietors keep a weather eye on the long season, not on single days. A sudden downpour may double custom, but too many such days bruise a crew. Leather fatigues when it is dried too near a fire, men fatigue the same way. A sensible master dismisses early after a vicious storm and loses an hour's earnings to gain a week's soundness. He keeps a journal of weather and money, wet through afternoon. 3 hill extras, 2 returns from the theatre, paid lampboy his penny. The city's prosperity is written in such dull lines. You may ask, because you prize order, whether rain breeds disputes. It does, but they are of a kind Bath knows how to digest. A visitor complains that a shilling extra for the Crescent is new. The proprietor produces last season's printed card with the same figure. The matter ends with an apology and a dry towel. 2 chairs arrive at one door called by 2 voices. The bearers sought priority by the older rule, invalid before fine silk, and the silk is grateful when she sees the invalid. A coachman curses at a corner, a beadle attends, the coach presses against the horse's temper rather than the beadle's staff. The chair, having already turned, is gone before the quarrel becomes music. Rain challenges tempers, habits save them. You will notice, too, a quiet generosity that rain loosens. Those who might not in dry weather think of others' coats now find themselves paying for an extra chair for a housemaid to reach home without soaking her only gown. A clergyman, seeing 2 bearers at the end of their strength on the last hill, carries the poles himself 4 paces to a level, an image no one repeats in print and everyone remembers in trade. A pastry cook keeps a pot of broth for men who have carried since dawn. He serves it for a penny, but he never seems to have the right change when a known back is at his bench. Baths are full of this arithmetic that looks like kindness because it is. In the end, the sedan is not an ornament in the rain. It is infrastructure. It knits the town together when weather would tear it. It keeps a duchess decent and a curate dry. It gets a letter delivered to a bedchamber when the writer cannot risk a chill. It keeps the rooms company on time. It lets the theatre disgorge without panic. It denies the rain the small victory of making everything later and more fractious than it ought to be. The chairmen do not consider themselves heroes. They consider themselves tradesmen who know the city's gradients better than its bookmen know Latin. You have ridden enough bad weather nights to recognise the sound that means you're almost home. The particular fall of the bearer's boots on the 3 flags outside your lodging. The little lift of the poles so the chair clears the shallow puddle that always forms by the downpipe. The pause before the set down that allows your maid to open the door on the 3rd knock. It is a music of competence. You tip what is customary and add a 6pence once a week to oblige your conscience to stay grateful. The chairmen touch their caps without drama. When the door closes, you hear the rain again without the beat of boots through it, and are struck by the small truth that a city's dignity survives ugly weather only by means of humble machines and men who keep their tempo. And so the thought you carry to your candle is not about romance, but about endurance. If the sedan chair and its bearers preserve Bath's order when rain hardens every errand, what happens to the city's temper when fashion forgets such trades, or when impatient visitors prefer wheels to shoulders at any cost? Will the small courtesies that kept doorways civil and schedules intact be washed away by convenience? Or will the old routes and fares still hold their line in the wet? The second look at the sedan chair belongs to the ledger and the body. How money, muscle, and municipal habit turn a painted box into the most reliable hour-keeper in wet weather. If Section 1 showed you the choreography at the curb, this one walks you behind the ranks to the counting tables, the storerooms of leather and pole, and the unboastful discipline by which men make the city punctual when the sky is not. Begin with the posted fare, because a small board in a splash of horn tells you more about Bath's temper than any sermon on politeness. The tariff is printed in a hand the eye can swallow at a glance. Pump to rooms, rooms to theatre, to the Crescent, Hillador, waiting per quarter hour, night after 11, and below that the line that oils an entire economy, by agreement for distances not named. The board is a truce. Without it, rain would turn every doorway into a negotiation. With it, money is counted before temper is tried. Visitors learn to carry small coin. Chairmen learn to present the board as if it were the city speaking, not a man bargaining. The difference is subtle and saves quarrels. The agreement line matters because Bath is a town of exceptions disguised as routine. A lady who has sat too long at cards asks to be carried to a lodging in a cul-de-sac where wheels will not venture. A half-pay officer, generous and careful of his purse, proposes to share a chair for 2 short runs with a friend who is lame. A doctor is wanted at a house where the front steps are narrow and the side porch the only practicable entrance. By agreement put such odd jobs under the law without snaring them in it. The price is named soberly. Chairmen, like apothecaries, do not prosper by charging for astonishment. They prosper by making the unusual look ordinary. Behind the tariff stands supply, and supply begins with timber. Poles are not any 2 lengths of ash sawn and shaped. They are a pair, matched for stiffness and balance, selected from stock as carefully as a violinist chooses a bow. The grain must run clean. The spring must be lively enough to return from strain without complaining. The weight must be such that a short man does not curse where a tall man sings. Poles are dressed with oil and rubbed till their skin is shut against wet. Iron shoes are fitted at each end to take the bite of flagstone without bruising wood. Rings at the chair's side must accept the poles with a slip rather than a scrape. Metal tolerates repetition. Wood remembers every insult. These are not romantic details. They are the grammar that prevents injury. Leather is another ledger of care. Curtains must bead rain and shed it. Seams must not gape where wind insists. Mica panes must be fixed in such fashion that a sharp turn does not rattle them into complaint. A proprietor keeps a shelf of dressings, neatsfoot for suppleness, blacking for show, wax for seams, and an awareness of distance from fire, because leather roasted is leather ruined. Hooks and ties must be learned by hand until a boy can make and unmake them in sleet. Rain teaches speed. Speed must not teach haste. Good men move quickly and never fumble. The bodies who carry this kit to work are as carefully maintained as the gear, and the maintenance looks plain until you measure its exactness. A chair crew eats to schedule because dinner that sits heavy is treachery, when a man must take a hill in the last hour of light. Porridge in the morning, bread and cheese and a slice of cold meat when coin allows it, broth when a pastry cook has charity and the weather warrants it. Cider in season, beer watered in prudence, spirits only when soaked through and offered out of kindness by someone who knows the difference between lending heat and stealing legs. Boots are the real diet, soles thick enough to forget a pebble, uppers that keep faith with a calf wrapped in damp wool, nails set with sense so the step bites without tearing the room's polished thresholds. Straps for shoulders are not an ornament of strength, they are a surgeon's foresight. Without them, a day's lift becomes a month's lameness. Training takes the form Bath loves best, apprenticeship that looks like help. A boy polishes brass, yes, but he also learns to gauge weight by ear, the creak a chair makes when a gentleman of consequence sits too hard, the almost silent set down when a child is carried asleep. He learns the doorways by feel, blindfolded in play, by men who remember how a misjudged inch becomes a bruised knuckle and a shout at the wrong moment. He practices the set down on a sloped flagstone, rear man lowering a breath slower than front so the box is level where the foot finds it. He's shown how to take turns with grace, front man calls, rear answers with a fractional check. The poles cross the ring like a pen across a paper when the hand knows its own script. No book records these things. A back that has carried and is not yet broken is the archive. Rain recalibrates the day's map. The musician's cut, sheltered by deep eaves, is marked for use when a cello is aboard. The doctor's line, long and level, is reserved when lungs complain. The lady's turn to a side porch becomes obligatory when the front steps flow like a weir. The theatre slip, narrow but clean, is the difference between a dry arrival for a benefit night and a flurry of cloaks in a crowded vestibule. Chairmen keep these routes like hymns, and the city responds with its antiphon: drains kept honest, downpipes mended quickly, stones relaid in the most chafed corners first. The corporation's men know that a loose flag injures more than boots. It injures a trade that carries the town's reputation over its shoulder. Night work is its own syllabus. Lanterns are trimmed at twilight, wicks are cut square, glass is wiped in a clean rag, a small tin of sand rides in the corner for a quick sprinkle on a treacherous patch at a threshold. Voices are lowered because a city that means to sleep will not forgive clatter after the farce. The tariff's after 11 line is not greed. It is compensation for the hour when a man's foot may betray him, and so must be persuaded to behave with money. A crew returning a dowager to the Crescent in a late shower learn to lean into the hill at the same moment a beadle makes a lamp remember its duty with a tap, and the harmony between the two keeps the night from turning dramatic. The virtue of Bath is that it does not make stories unless paid to do so on a stage. Accidents are treated as defects in a system rather than as proofs of fate. A slip that bruises a wrist is written into a notebook at the proprietor's table. Time, weather, stone at fault, crew, so that the same mischief is not suffered twice. A grating that caught a heel is chalked, then mended. The chalk marks the shame and speeds the mason. A dispute at a door over who called first becomes a lesson, not a legend. Invalid before silk, and the silk will usually agree when she sees the truth of it. The point is not that mischance is banished. The point is that it is not allowed to set precedent. In Bath, "that will do" is not praise. It is a warning: overturn tomorrow. A word about status, because the city's civility comes partly from refusing false hierarchies. A man who carries is not a servant in the private sense. He's a public tradesman. He touches his cap, yes, accepts coin, yes, but keeps a dignity that is enforced by the trade itself. He does not gossip of the faces he brings to doors. He does not yield his place in a rank to a loud stranger. He does not accept a command that endangers his back or his partner's. If a gentleman presses to be set down where no sure footing waits, the front man answers with the only phrase that can politely contradict a purse: "Sir, the set down is here." Rank travels best when it obeys the laws that protect everybody. There is an internal charity that rarely sees print because the men who practice it dislike boasting. A fund is kept, shillings gathered slowly in a box, against sickness or a broken collarbone. Widows are not left to pawn the poles. A chair may be worked for her by friends for a month, and the earnings set aside until she finds a place. A boy whose father is lost to fever is taken into the ranks sooner than his muscle strictly warrants, and set to learn ties and latches until grief grows manageable and skill arrives to meet it. In a spa town, good fortune comes by degrees. Misfortune is the faster thing. The trade slows both to the same useful pace. Relations with other carriers are not only courteous, they are efficient. Bearers and wheeled chairmen know where the other's work is better. In heavy rain and narrow lanes, sedan first. In fair weather and level, wheels. At the theatre, when coaches clog the front, sedans through, wheels round. At the Bath's rear door, wheels defer to steps. At the room's grand front, sedans take the short bow and pass. These compacts are not written on boards. They're enforced by eyes, then by a beadle staff if someone pretends ignorance. The staff seldom rises. Habit does the greater part. There is a quiet science in the way the body is held under load, and you may miss it because it hides under the smooth swing of the box. The front man keeps his chest open to breathe. The rear man listens for that breath as a fiddler listens for a partner's bow. Knees are left alive, ankles do not lock, toes find purchase at the instant the poles tell the truth of the angle. When the wind tries the leather and makes the box a sail, both men lower by an inch and lean 3, geometry that turns a gust into a shrug. If the occupant struggles with a cough or a spasm, there is a place near the walk where the set down is always soft and the view always kind. The craft includes knowing when a ride is a rest disguised. The theatre supplies the hardest test of order in rain. Benefit nights end with more humanity at one door than any sensible plan would allow. But the plan exists, and it works because the players in it keep their tempers. Coaches stay out in the street. Sedans cycle like breaths. Out, turn, set, in. Wheelers take the longer loop. Beadles keep the corner swept and the plank true. A lampboy lifts his ladder without impeding a turn. A black-clad violinist passes with his case and is treated as cargo of the city. The tariff for waiting comes due here more often than elsewhere, and the chairman, who can count the minutes by the burn of shoulders, count coin without rancour when a patron returns apologetic with a wet programme in her glove and a sixpence under it. Winter rain becomes snow twice in a decade and teaches a different syllabus. Poles bite differently in slush. Steps want a broom. Chairmen change stride and shorten reach. The city throws sand with a will because the chair is not an ornament now but an artery. Lanterns gutter and must be tended. Breath steams and wets wool. Leather is wiped with frost-stiff fingers and must not be cracked by unkind proximity to a brazier. Trade slows without stopping. A child is carried to a doctor who will not be reached by wheels. A letter is delivered to a bed where thanks cannot be spoken. A clergyman returns from a baptism and gives the crew the only compliment that matters on such nights. You were there. Bath in adversity is simply Bath divested of its rhetoric. Disputes about money exist because money is involved, but they rarely survive the door. A visitor declares a fare excessive in tones that fit a London street. The proprietor produces last season's board. The visitor recalculates his opinion and recalls that a dry coat is worth more than a clever speech. A householder complains that chairs block his step in a downpour. The beadle points out the posted line that grants precedence to trades keeping the city moving. The householder remembers that his own lady arrives dry by means of those poles. Rain teaches fairness the way fire teaches respect, rapidly. You might suppose that the chair's economy suffers when fashion leans toward wheels and away from shoulders. It does, and it does not. Wheels flourish in fair weather and on new streets. Sedans persist in rain, steps, and those old corners that architecture keeps for the sake of beauty and human scale. The trade thins as a century turns and then stubbornly refuses to die, because weakness, dignity, and wet stone are a combination that will always require men who can turn a corner in as many feet as a door is wide. Bath's conservatism is practical here. What works continues. Letters written from the city in bad months mention the chairman as they mention the Abbey bells, as a sound that proves the place is itself. It rained all the night, a lady writes, yet I was carried at 11 without a drop upon my stocking. A clergyman. I was set down at the rooms without injury to my book or to my temper, which in wet is more in danger. A low-spirited patient whose nerves make weather into enemy. The men took me by the sideway. No jolting. I thanked Providence for the leather and the poles. These are not sentences to set in guilt. They are the grain of a well-run town. At last, The book of fares closes for a day that began damp and ended honest, and you watch the ranks unmake themselves. Poles are cleaned and set on pegs. Curtains are wiped and left a handbreadth open to air. Boots are knocked together heel to heel. The coin from a day's work is counted with the quiet solemnity of men who know what it buys. A boy takes home the brass to polish by a fire. A man rubs the ache out of his forearm and smiles at the prospect of sleep. A proprietor locks a box and says aloud to no one in particular, "No accidents." In Bath, that is a benediction. You carry away from the day's study a plain conviction worthy of a dull account book, that the sedan trade, in rain especially, is a civic utility disguised as a courtesy. It keeps schedules and fabrics, it keeps oaths made to doctors and engagements made to friends. It keeps tempers untried. It keeps the theatre from becoming a battle and the rooms from becoming a swamp. If it asks money, it gives punctuality. If it asks space, it gives order. If it asks a little patience at the corner, it returns you a city in which the wet does not dissolve the plan. And you leave a question open in the manner owed to modest history. If tomorrow's visitors, impatient for speed and disinclined to pay for shoulders, choose wheels wherever wheels can be forced, will Bath's rainy day competence, the small compacts, the unprinted priorities, the careful set down at the dry inch of step, endure? Or will convenience, once purchased at the price of these old crafts, prove dearer than anyone expected when the first hard storm tests the new habits? The test of any town's craft is not the day it dazzles, but the night it holds together. You finish your study of the sedan chair by following it through an entire wet evening. From the first taps of rain on stone to the last soft set down after the farce, because only in the long stretch does the trade's discipline disclose its full, unromantic virtue. What you will notice most, once you decide to notice the ordinary, is the way 100 small refusals of fuss add up to one large refusal of chaos. The first act begins at twilight, when the abbey's damp rises into a fine mist, and the sky cannot decide between drizzle and rain. Chairmen converge on their ranks as the rooms begin to light. The posted tariff is checked, its horn cover wiped. Poles are inspected with the same brisk intimacy a sailor gives a line before a squall. A boy, apprenticed to patience, runs a leather rag across mica panes until they look like small moons. Another tucks a wrapped stick of lamp sand into the corner of the box. Nobody hurries, because haste is a debt the night will collect with interest. Then the first calls, a physician for the upper side of the Crescent, 2 ladies to the theatre, a widow cautious of her chest, to a tea before cards. The crews slide poles, lift and move with that ceremonial sway which is both signature and safeguard. You take a place where you can observe the turning of the evening's gears, a step outside the rooms, under the shelter where notices look most legible, with the beadle's staff an arm's length away and the orchestra faint through glass. You begin to read the street as a score. Coaches keep a low, impatient undertone in the road. Bath chairs hum where the paving is newest. Sedan boots make the beat. People enter and leave to a tempo you could mark with your thumb on the chair's leather panel. Rain decisions articulate the rhythm. A hood lifted another notch. A pole adjusted for a steeper set down. A turn taken wide to avoid a standing puddle that looks innocent until a foot tests its depth. Inside the rooms, the master of ceremonies earns his title before the first set by doing nothing dramatic and everything exact. He places a chair near the door for an invalid who cannot stand to watch the opening minuet. He sends a message to the card room to keep one table back from the draft. He consults, briefly, with a chairman about the best door to use when the weather worsens. Outside, the beadle folds his hands around the staff in a posture that is both rest and readiness. He knows where the pinch will come, at the flourished end of the first country dance, when the tea room opens and half the company remembers it is living bodies that require warmth and not only conversation. The rain chooses that moment to become honest. It thickens from fret to fall. The flagstones darken to a uniform sheen. The sound changes from scattered taps to a proper drumming that would defeat a lesser town. The sedan crews, already set, simply translate moisture into procedure. A lamp is coaxed brighter. Poles are shouldered with a touch more depth. Steps shorten a fraction. Greetings, never loud, become nods. A lady who at 6 would have walked at 8 requires a chair. A gentleman who at noon endured the hill will at 9 pay the hill extra gladly. The tariff's additional shilling stops being a printed curiosity and becomes a fair exchange for shoulders that will not slip. You choose to ride one circuit, a spectator's privilege, paid for in coin and attention, to feel the grammar from inside the box. The door shuts you into a private sentence of leather and mica. The squaring of the chair at the step is punctuation. The lift is syntax. Outside, water runs off the roof as if shorn by an invisible knife. Inside, your breath warms the small space to a comfort you would call domestic with a world not moving under you. The crew carries level through a corner you would have mistaken for a hazard if you had seen it from the pavement. The front man calls right with a rhythm that is half musical note, half instruction. The rear answers not in words, but in a fractional check your body feels as steadiness. At a door 2 streets away, the set-down is so exact your shoe finds the sole of dry as if it had been kept there for you all day. On the return without you, the chair re-enters weather as if entering employment. You step aside and watch the choreography of precedence at a press. A bath chair, its hood glistening, cedes to a sedan where steps forbid wheels. A coach takes its turn with a patience you would not credit in London. A boy with a board improves a treacherous lip of stone with a single, practised placement. No one speaks a speech. Everyone performs a rule. You feel the relief of belonging to a town where the rules of movement are so well memorised, they can be observed without discussion in the heaviest wet. The theatre supplies the night's second act. Playbills, pasted earlier on dry boards, promise a comedy with a farce to follow. The house is full because rain gives people a common errand, and the comfort of being under a roof with noise that is not weather. Sedans line the side, wheelers take the longer arc, coaches keep off the lip of the pavement, and the doorkeepers, who know every face worth knowing, shake moisture from their sleeves between bows. When the curtain falls at last, the door becomes an exam of municipal competence. Here you watch Bath solve a problem that ruins other towns: how to convert a sudden crowd into departures without tempers. The chairmen answer with repetition: out, turn, set, in, out, turn, set, in. The beadle trims flow with a gesture so small it might be a moth in lamplight. The lampboy feeds a wick. A violinist with his case is threaded across the stream like a delicate parcel. A lady mislays a glove. It is in her hand before anxiety hardens into a story. The farce has ended indoors. Outdoors it never begins. The hill to the Crescent is the night's third test, a long glossy sermon addressed to boots and lungs. You walk the first yards to comprehend the surface, dressed stone made treacherous by a steady fall, a camber that would lure a hurried foot to the gutter, a wind that comes around the curve as if it had practised. 2 crews take the climb with a unity you will later describe as understated heroism and be embarrassed to reread because the men themselves would call it work. The front man leans just enough to keep the poles speaking truth. The rear keeps his chest open and his eyes forward, feeling the front man's breath through the timber like a telegraph. In the middle stretch, where water sheets and the sets are older, a figure steps from a doorway, housemaid or mistress, it does not matter, and holds the lantern low so the men see texture, not glare. No thanks are spoken beyond a cap touch. The light returns indoors, the hill finishes. The extra shilling will make sense of the ache tomorrow. Rain alters conversation as much as it alters pace. The town that by day speaks at length now speaks in phrases that conserve warmth. Rooms, side door, pump by the yard, theatre after the crowd, doctors, quiet line. Within the chair, people who earlier would have rehearsed card hands now say only what is needed. A gentleman. My compliments to your partner. That was a neat turn by the bridge. A widow. Steady on the step. Thank you. A wet clergyman, breathing carefully. The lane, if you please. The economy is not chill, it is merciful. Fewer words mean less wet on the tongue, less impatience in the ear. From time to time the night offers a minor failure, so that you can witness how the city prevents it from becoming a larger one. A board shifts at a doorstep. The chair rocks. The front man swears. Not loudly, not at anyone, but at gravity in general, and the rear corrects the angle before the occupant knows how near the surprise came to becoming an incident. The beadle appears without menace, sets his staff against the jamb and says to the householder's boy, "Wait it proper." The boy waits it. The chair departs. The next chair arrives and benefits from a repair whose swiftness has kept tempers flat. If you want a definition of a conservative town's intelligence, it is this: the speed at which small things are put right without anyone being made a moral of. You follow one crew down to the river to see how water meets water. Rain blurs the surface into a pattern the eye could stare at for an hour. Lanterns scribble on it and are wiped away. The bridge holds its shops as if the world were dry under its feet. The chair crosses with the same indifferent competence it shows everywhere else. The guide stones that keep wheels in line serve also to remind feet where to place themselves. Wind takes a try at the leather and fails to find purchase because seams were waxed in the afternoon by a man who knew that night forgives neither slackness nor vanity. On the far side, the chair turns by the bakery, whose warmth supplies a mercy no tariff can price. Air sweet enough to erase, for one step, the smell of wet wool and blacking. By 10, rain and routine have turned the city into a quieter instrument. The rooms release company and pulses. Cards break off without arguments about one more hand. The master of ceremonies, who knows that late hours undo more cures than sermons about sin, ushers a last set to a sensibly early end. He nods to a chairman and points with his eyes to a door where a lady ought not to wait long. The chairman understands the lady dry will never know that any arrangement was made. This is Bath's preferred kind of benevolence, invisible, punctual, and forgettable. Near 11, the tariff's night line activates. You do not need the printed board to tell you. You can read the hour in the way men place their feet. Tired bodies economize motion without risking it. The After 11 edition is less a fee than a mask for prudence. It discourages frivolous errands while rewarding a craft that must be most exact when strength thins. The last calls come from people either sensible or necessary. A physician summoned from cards by a message at his elbow. A couple who stayed for the final tune and now wish to avoid a cough in the morning. An old gentleman who knows that vanity has punished enough men of his acquaintance to make him content with help. Your final circuit of the night belongs to a scene that reveals the sedan's deepest politics. The rain has moderated to the steady fall that writes its own order. 2 chairs reach a door at once, one bearing silk and laughter, the other a man who breathes with audible patience. The bearers' eyes meet. Silk yields a heartbeat without martyrdom. The beadle's gaze softens. The invalid is set down, hat lifted, breath measured, thanks spoken in a voice that does not waste itself. Silk follows, and because the city has taught it manners, calls out, "Good night," in a way that sounds less like condescension than like citizenship. That is the sedan's achievement when weather is worst. It makes precedence a function of need rather than of title without inviting anyone to say a word about equality. Past midnight, wet stone shines empty. The last chairs return to ranks that unmake themselves. Leather is opened a hand's breadth to air. Poles are stood against pegs. Boots are knocked free of grit. Coins are counted in the polite privacy of hands beneath the cloak. The apprentice rubs mica dry and will, tomorrow, polish brass to a dull glow that resists both ostentation and neglect. The beadle walks once more along the front, taps the plank that gave trouble earlier, and finds it true now. The lamp boy lowers a ladder, caps his light, and becomes a child again. The master of ceremonies, passing the door, sees nobody left to marshal and is content. The orchestra has been paid. The floor will be buffed in the morning. The city has confessed to nothing it cannot forgive by sleep. You turn home by streets that in daylight are confident and in rain are severe without malice. The sound of water in gutters carries the comfort of competent drains. The abbey's dark mass looks less like a sermon than like shelter. The smell of wet stone is almost clean. You think of what the night would have been without the trade. Sodden silks, quarrels at doors, delays that make tempers brittle, a theatre disgorging panic instead of people. You think, too, of what the trade would be without the city's complicity. Broken poles, loose flags, unlit corners, boards unweighted, a printed tariff that nobody reads. The chairman and the town keep each other honest, and the rain is merely the examiner who marks the paper without prejudice. Because this is boring history, you end not with a flourish, but with an inventory of absences that constitute success. No wheel stuck in a gutter, no ankle turned at a step, no lamp overturned, no quarrel enlarged to spectacle, no invalid kept waiting in wet, no servant made to apologise for the city's neglect, no hour stolen from sleep by the vanity of lateness. The sedan trade produces these zeros nightly in rain, and the zeros add up to a civic sum you would be foolish to overlook. Morning will scold the night's damp out of cloaks and curtains. The pump room will smell faintly of warmed mineral and drying leather. The tariff will look as benign in daylight as it felt necessary in wet. The crews will sleep with the soreness that means Work done, not harm earned. The town will congratulate itself by doing nothing out of the ordinary. That is the point. Bath survives weather by refusing to make weather into drama. So you fold this study into your larger lesson and let the question that concludes the story be appropriately modest and difficult. If the city's peace on ugly nights depends on trades that look old-fashioned and on habits that require small personal restraints, printed fares, orderly turns, the discipline to accept shoulders where wheels would gratify pride, what will happen to Bath's rainy day competence when a generation prefers speed to steadiness and privacy, to the public choreography of help? Will the town keep its unremarkable miracles, or will the first long storm after the old rules are forgotten teach too late what the leather, the poles, and the men once kept from becoming a story?